Chapter 1680. Many people nodded in agreement. The fight against evil was never a meaningless show of support by the majority and leaving the battle to the few. This was the largest ghost tower in the city. At the same time, in the City of Calamity, Hodier, the Ice Guardian, could only watch from below. Because aerial combat was not his domain, Duque immediately realized that he could not retreat. Maligos, who was flying in the air, only had half of his body left. Everything below his waist had been cut off, and now it seemed that it could not be reattached. The figure of Lich King Arthas suddenly appeared in the dark green crystal. "Oh? Do you really think I don't dare to fight you here?" Duque was amused. "Huh. Arthas, it's better than you. It doesn't matter who you fight, as long as you hide under the bed and don't come out, no one can force you." In the trapezoidal room at the base of the ghost tower, the Sun King easily found the target of this trip. It was a huge soul crystal that needed 20 people to barely wrap their arms around, and it was a full 10 stories high. It was not only the ice elemental rushing over from the water elemental realm, but also a terrifying attack combined with the natural cold of no scent. The mountain collapsed. A round of arcane bombs made Calegos dizzy, and then it pounced on his back and bit him non-stop. Everyone could see it. Without a powerful powerhouse to help Calegos, there would probably be another demigod bone dragon under the Lich King. "You dare? Of course you dare. But can you do it?" Accompanied by Arthas' mocking voice, an earth-shattering roar erupted under his feet. Duque was not annoyed. After all, his loss was temporary. Once he retreated, Naxxramas behind him would become the direct target of this volcanic eruption. "Damn, everyone knows you're useless, but can't you, Calegos, give me a little more strength?" Arthas' blue eyes flickered in his helmet. Suddenly, he smiled. "Very good. Not bad. Once, I thought you were a despicable thief. Now, I will at least recognize you as an opponent who can fight me. I will watch here and see if you and your coalition can afford the so-called price." A moment ago, his face was still a little ashen, but in the next second, it softened. The coalition army's encirclement and suppression of the Calamity troop came to an end. Driven by the enormous shadow magic array, the dark green crystal was constantly emitting a beam of chaotic green light into the sky. It didn't matter if it made sense or not. He immediately used mystery with a higher authority, forcefully using a sea of ice elemental essence to fight against Duque's weave. Every living being of Azeroth had the obligation to fight and pay the price, even if the price was their lives and souls. Why is Arthas behaving in such an abnormal manner? The Sun King didn't mind. He brought the 2 radiant moon liches and slowly floated into the largest spectre tower. What a joke! Even if he only had 70% of his strength left, Calegos wouldn't even be able to escape, let alone fight back. How could Duque give up the floating fortress that they had worked so hard to snatch? When it was confirmed that there were no more Calamity warriors in the city, Delano and Anastrian met up in the center of the city. The dignified current magic guardian dragon was actually beaten like a dog by a lazy former dragon. Faced with Duque's mockery, Arthas was angry at first, but then his voice was filled with sarcasm. His lover, Matagorsa, wanted to help, but the difference in strength was too great. He was blasted down in an instant, and fell on the shadow arches with heavy injuries. What made the Alliance most depressed was that Calegos' army was defeated like a landslide. The problem was that Arthas was very abnormal. Obviously, he wanted to restrain them. There were corpses everywhere, some of them orcs, some of them forgotten ones, but most of them belonged to the Calamity troop. A shocking change occurred. But, the Sun King was the first to speak. "This is where the node of the magic ley line is. As long as we change the ley line here, the snowstorm surrounding the Icecrown Glacier area will be further reduced. The Alliance can then bring in more flying warships." He gently placed his withered right hand bone, which had already peeled off its flesh, on the green crystal. Just as Anastrian was about to chant a spell to change the magic ley line here, his soul had been seriously injured in that interception. If one were to really evaluate his strength, Maligos now only had 70% of his strength when he was alive at most. With that, Arthas actually didn't plan to continue fighting. He just leaned on his sword and stood on the ice above the Shadow Cathedral's dome, looking at Duque just like that. The Sun King explained to Delano, but this young and brave orc leader didn't care at all. His huge fangs twitched. "That's your mage's business. The tribe's warriors have already completed their duty." At the same time, on the shadow arches in the northwest, the demigod Lich Maligos was torturing the new blue dragon King Calegos in the air. "Hee, isn't it natural for the Undying to offer their souls and bodies for their king? But you, Duke Marcus, don't you think you've fallen into a trap? Leave the rest to us." Magni and the other Alliance soldiers were all sighing softly. King against king, general against general. This time, Computer Lou left Duque slightly stunned. Duque immediately adjusted his state of mind. Fallen into a trap? Perhaps. But as long as I'm up against you, Arthas, there's nothing I can do even if other areas are broken through. I'm not a saint, nor am I an omniscient and omnipotent super true god. I can't save everyone in Azeroth, every living being. If I want the future of my descendants, every living being must pay the price. The white mountain peak split apart with a loud bang, and then tens of thousands of tons of snowflakes splattered out from the snowy peak under Arthas's feet. He was so sudden and so close that even someone as powerful as Anastrian was caught off guard. Duque's words made the Alliance soldiers who heard this fall into deep thought. Having lost 2 legs and a large tail, Maligos's close combat abilities were reduced by more than half. Although he had become a Dracolic, his shadow magic power had been greatly strengthened, and his ice and arcane magic power had been greatly weakened. On the other hand, his fire magic power, which the undead creatures hated the most, was completely useless. Those who weren't at the demigod level were no match for him at all. Duque had already reached the pinnacle of being a commander and the strongest. Then, this method of bullying others forced Alexstrasza to rush over to save the day. Because Maligos had sealed off the surrounding space, the Red Dragon Queen could only fly over at full speed to the nearby airspace. Chapter 1681. Be careful, my king. Arthas, the screams in the spirit tower made Dranos and his subordinates, who were waiting outside, jump on the spot. Arthas? Isn't he confronting Marcus? Hearing the screams, young Salyafar was bewildered. The Alliance army's intelligence exchange was quite good. Just as the battle stopped, they received news that Naxxramas had been severely damaged and Arthas had appeared. Since it was Duque fighting Arthas over there, how could there be another Arthas here? Could it be that Anastrian was too afraid of Arthas and confused the leader of the enemy with a more powerful Death Knight? In the next moment, Dranos drove this damn thought out of his mind. The Sun King, who was famous in the entire tribe, had been rebuked. Although a fallen phoenix was not as good as a chicken, Anastrian had once been rich. The lifestyle that was imprinted in the memories of the High Elves still dominated him even after he became a lich. Even if he didn't say it, everyone knew that he looked down on the tribe's uncouth chiefs. For example, even though he was already a skeleton, every time he sat down, he would use magical elements to drive away the dust on his seat. If he could, the Sun King would never allow himself to be so embarrassed. At this moment, the Sun King was like a pitiful worm that had been hit by a rampaging rhinoceros. The surging and irresistible impact directly caused his back to smash through the walls of the spirit tower that had been strengthened by magic runes. Seeing the fragments of the tower wall that contained dark magic explode like petals blown away in a storm, one could imagine how terrifying the attack that the Sun King had endured was. If he was a living person, perhaps his entire internal organs would have been completely shattered by this blow. Fortunately, he was a lich. However, it was also because he was a lich that he could counterattack in ways that ordinary people could not. Although his chest had been pierced by Arthas' left hand, he could still maintain his spellcasting state. An instant cast, Flame Blast, exploded at the position of Arthas' helmet at absolute zero distance. Boom! The mushroom that soared into the sky was clearly visible through the towering city walls. Kale, who was about to rest, looked at the sudden explosion in the city in shock. He suddenly stood up and no longer cared about his elegance. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "It's Arthas, another Arthas? How was this possible?" News of the engagement with Arthas was transmitted from both the east and west ends of the Ice-Crown Glacier at the same time, causing the entire communication network of the Allied forces to be thrown into disarray. To Arthas. When did he have a brother? At the same time, the image that was broadcasted on the magic mirror was also incomprehensible. In the west, a certain Arthas was summoning ice elemental powers that could shatter the heavens and shatter the earth, and was engaged in a fierce battle with the demigod Duque. In the east, the mighty Breaking Dawn expert Anastrian had been captured. The Sun King's Flame Blast was extremely powerful. One could see that the surroundings of the gigantic Netherworld Tower were already beginning to melt. It was easy to destroy the Netherworld Tower with a cannonball, but it was extremely difficult to melt all the fragments into liquid. From this, it could be seen that Anastrian had not held back at all. But, the Breaking Dawn rank Flame Blast, which was already terrifying in the eyes of mortals, had not been able to penetrate the ice elemental shield wrapped around the Lich King's black armor. The mysteriousness of a low rank had vanished in front of the mysteriousness of a higher rank. No, with a blood-curdling scream, the Lich King's hand that had pierced through the Sun King's craggy chest turned into a palm. Arthas exerted some force, as if she was holding onto something. Only professionals of a certain level could see that it was a semi-illusory, beating heart. That was Anastrian's heart, and also the core of his soul. Arthas abruptly retracted his arm and pulled out the translucent heart, which instantly turned into a ball of liquid that flickered with a blue radiance. With a slap, a palm stained with the blue liquid was imprinted on the right side of the Sun King's skull. Arthas's thick and murderous voice echoed throughout the entire city of Calamity. "Pledge your loyalty to the great Lich King." Out of the expectations of every tribe, the Sun King, who had never bowed to anyone and would only bow slightly in front of the great chief, actually knelt on one knee before Arthas and shouted, "For you, His Majesty, the Supreme Lich King." A king kneeling to a king. This meant, unable to hold back the rage in his heart, Dranos, who had recovered from his shock, roared, "Perish!" Arthas, he immediately unleashed a full-force leap slash. Letting the body soar into the air without any leverage was actually a rather foolish way of fighting. But when the leap slash was infused with the power of the warrior's spiritual condensation, fury, an ordinary leap slash became a terrifying attack that could split the heavens and the earth. A deafening howl. An extremely ferocious face. An angry mouth filled with fangs that symbolized brutality. If it were any other opponent, they might have been intimidated by his frightening aura. Unfortunately, he was Arthas, the strongest Death Knight in the world. The attack that was extremely terrifying in the eyes of others was just a huge piece of meat sent to the blade of Arthas's sword. With his left hand still pressed against the Sun King's skeletal face, Arthas's right body made a striding motion. With just a glance, a death's grasp that Dranos could not match was unleashed. A giant illusory hand that could not be seen by the naked eye suddenly appeared in the void, grabbing the enraged orc and pressing his chest onto the blade of Frostmourne. No, can. Delano's round eyes bulged out due to the impending death. His eyes were bloodshot. Even at the moment of his death, he couldn't understand what had just happened. How did he lose his balance and control of his body? How did he die? young Xiaofan did not have time to find the answer. An extremely cold and terrifying suction force came from the runic greatsword that pierced through his chest, instantly freezing his body that was not cold yet, and pulling his burning soul into an extremely cold soul hell. No, amidst the cries of disbelief, the entire tribe exploded. Was this scene real or fake? It was just one move. Two powerful tribe leaders, one dead and the other surrendered? How terrifying was the Lich King Arthes? Chapter 1682. In war, information was important, but real-time information was even more important. 25 years ago, orders had to be passed on by foot. If it wasn't horses, then it was griffins. That outdated method of sending orders on the battlefield had long been swept aside by the Allied army. After using the magic communication network, who would want to send orders without a reply after a long time? After working with the Alliance for so long, the tribal leaders had long since become accustomed to using the magic communication network to do battle. Of course, in order to prevent being tricked by the Alliance, Sar had privately asked Pharaoh led by Anastrian to create a unique magic communication network for the tribe. When working with the Alliance, they naturally used the alliances. After all, with a demigod like Duque, the communication was definitely fast and good. In addition to the telephone-like magic communication that couldn't see faces, Duque also had the Alliance add a multi-screen real-time video broadcast. Although it was said that he had learned it from the Pantheon and the Burning Legion's void battleships, it was actually all his transmigrated knowledge. Whenever the Allied army fought a battle of 1,000 people, at least 3 sky mages would be sent to observe the battlefield. These pharaohs didn't do anything but control the mages' eyes to transmit the images they saw through the magic network and finally to the Allied army's headquarters. The headquarters also had a rather modern feel to it. Divided into categories, each small battlefield would have more than 3 girls with good eyesight. They were both inspectors and messengers. Behind these girls were commanders of all levels. In the sloping command post, orders were directly passed down from the highest level to the battlefield commanders. It was precisely because of such a modern command system that everyone quickly learned of the shocking fact that one of the tribe's leaders had died and the other had surrendered. No, Varrock Xiaofan, who was rushing over with his troops, was furious. He had seen his son's death in the magic mirror. Impossible. Sar, who was far away in the Kalimdor continent's Orgrimmar, was extremely shocked. He couldn't accept the fact that the tribe had suddenly lost the leader of one of its main races. There were now 5 major races in the tribe, and each one had an indispensable role. The most numerous beast men were undoubtedly the cornerstone of the tribe. Whether it was warriors or warlocks, the beast men were the most numerous. Taurens were kind and brave, and were the strongest race for assault. However, there were too few Taurens to be the main combat force. The trolls provided the best long-range attacks for the horde, and the trolls' javelins were indispensable. Although gnomes had all kinds of problems, they controlled the tribe's economy and technological development. The Forsaken. Although Anastrian had never been very respectful to Thrall, the Forsaken had given the horde soldiers a way to be reborn a second time. Not only that, almost all the mages in the tribe were forgotten ones. Mages not only provided sharp long-range attacks, but the importance of these forgotten ones who had been transformed from humans and elves had long surpassed the class itself in the current era where communication on the battlefield was becoming more and more important. Without the support of the Alliance and Anastrian's small-scale magical communication network, the horde would revert back to the primitive times of yelling orders. Sal suddenly stood up. He didn't even know when the armrest of the chief's throne had been crushed by him. Looking at the mysterious palm print on the Sun King's face in the magic mirror, Sal knew that Anastrian was definitely not surrendering on his own, at least not in such a humiliating way. This powerful Lich, who had once broken free from the Lich King's restraint, had most likely had his will destroyed by the Lich King in direct spiritual contact, and then he had knelt down. The defeat and death of the 2 leaders had already made Sal extremely worried. What was even more painful was yet to come. On the city wall, the catapults that were previously in position were specially helping the Forsaken army to bombard the ghost towers in the city. But now, fire! Standing beside the catapults was Master Pharmacist Putray of the Royal Pharmacist Association of the New Undercity. Under his command, all the catapults suddenly made a crisp sound. Huge metal barrels were directly thrown into the City of Calamity while the Horde army was at a loss. Ah! Aren't those our catapults? Damn it! What is this? Most of the Forsaken and Orc warriors still didn't know that their leaders had knelt down. They were only horrified to see that their catapults had thrown something at them. The large metal barrels smashed into the city, destroying buildings and crushing people to death was a small matter. What was terrifying was what spread after the metal barrels exploded. It was clouds of yellow-green fumes. As long as they breathed in a little or touched it, be it the lively orcs or the forgotten ones who were supposed to be dead and unable to breathe, all of them let out a blood-curdling scream, subconsciously clutching their throats and collapsing. At most, they would convulse for about 10 seconds before they stopped moving. Traitor! Sal was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Even though he was the most restrained orc in the world, he couldn't control his emotions at this moment. It was obvious that the Forsaken had betrayed them. He had used some kind of new plague to shamelessly betray his compatriots and companions. The Alliance command was already in a mess. What happened? City of Calamity 1, please report. 2. If there's danger, retreat immediately. Just keep the magic in the magic net. But it wouldn't be so easy to leave once they came. In the blink of an eye, a terrifying chill burst forth from Arthas, who had killed young Xiaofan with a single sword strike. Where the City of Calamity had originally been, a new ice wall immediately rose from the ground, trapping all the Alliance soldiers who were trying to escape. They couldn't run, and they couldn't hold up. They had to close the door and beat the dogs. The Horde soldiers fell in droves, but after a while, they stood up again as soldiers of the Calamity army. This scene drove Sal crazy. Soon, the scene was cut off. Since the Lich King had descended, that terrifying elemental exclusion made it impossible for any magic to be used. Looking at the dark row of magic mirrors, Sal suddenly lost all his strength. He slumped into the great chief's seat, his eyes unfocused. Tens of thousands of troops had been wiped out in an instant. Not to mention the Horde with insufficient troops, even the large alliance could not bear it. Although there were 2 million new orcs in the Horde, not all of them could be warriors. Excluding the relatively weak laborers, women, and children, there were only 500,000 or 600,000 young men who could fight. Previously in the North Wind Tundra, the Warsong tribe had been ruthlessly beaten up by Maligos. They had lost 100,000 people in one winter, and now it was equivalent to wiping out the entire Forsaken race, plus young Xiaofan's Blackstone elites. The Horde was already badly hurt. Chapter 1683. What Thrall could not accept the most was the death of little Xiaofan. Among the next generation of beast men, Thrall had the highest hopes for him. He had the bravery of the traditional beast men, the spirit of unity, and a good sense of the big picture. Thrall had even thought of passing the position of Great Chief to Dranos. But now, it was all over. This was what the Calamity army feared the most. Once there was a large-scale annihilation, the dead soldiers would immediately become the enemy's helpers. An epic hero, Dranos, and a Breaking Dawn Great Lich. It was unknown if Arthas would strengthen their combat power. With one addition and one reduction, the difficulty of attacking the Ice Crown Fortress skyrocketed. The scene was interrupted, but it did not mean that the battle in the Calamity City was over. Oh! Under the thick armor, Arthas was a little surprised. He realized that while all the Horde infantrymen had fallen, the tanks belonging to the Alliance were still firing continuously. They were rapidly blasting the Horde soldiers who had turned into Calamity warriors into pieces. The tracks of the light tanks mercilessly crushed these fellows who had been allies not long ago. How dare you? Arthas was a little angry. He raised his hand, and a tank not far from him was grabbed by a pair of large hands made of ice that grew out of the ground. One hand grabbed the chassis of the tank, and the other hand tore open the top cover of the turret as if it was a thin piece of paper, revealing the driver inside. There was no fear, no anger, not even any emotion. The driver directly pulled out the large musket that he carried with him and fired at Arthas. Bang! 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 Arthas's movement stopped. He felt a little shocked and angry. Of course, these laughable low-energy bullets could not cause any damage to the great Lich King. There was another reason for his shock and anger: the ones shooting at him were not living people at all. They were mechanical gnomes from Otter that Mimiron viewed as expendable. These low to moderate level of intelligence faithfully carried out Mimiron's orders and attacked all enemies of the Calamity army until they were destroyed. Humph! Arthas did not want to see this laughable robot ever again. Even if it existed in this world for one more second, it was a mockery to him, the Lich King. 100 miles away, Arthas, who had been confronting Duque at the same time, spoke up. Duke Marcus. You knew that I would set up an ambush in the disaster city. Duque's expression didn't look too good in the face of the stern Arthas either. He didn't want to respond at all. The weave was his, and in this place where the elements were surging, no live footage could be leaked without his permission. Only the people of Naxxramas could see this. Duque was also unhappy. That's right, he tricked the two idiots. The incident in the City of Calamity this time was like a modified version of the incident with the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. Duque, who was familiar with the original history and knew that Master Apothecary Putris would betray the Alliance, naturally wouldn't continue sending the Alliance's soldiers to their deaths. He had Mimiron's mechanical gnome sit on the Alliance's tank just to put on a good show with a certain someone. In the original history, it was Putray and the Dreadlord Verimithas who had betrayed them, and the Allied army had no choice but to send an army to Gloom City to quell the rebellion. This bought a lot of time for Arthas. If Duque was a tribal chief, of course he would expose Putray as soon as he got the evidence, minimizing the damage that could be done to the tribe. Duque was the Alliance's commander, and this identity meant that Duque would only do things from the Alliance's point of view. The point was that Duque wasn't sure what role the Forsaken played in this incident. After all, the boss of these bones wasn't Queen Sylvanas, but an Astrian. Duque did get the absolute evidence that the Sun King was in cahoots with the Burning Legion. Duque didn't want to throw out the evidence at this time. In his imagination, if he threw out the evidence at the time of Mystery of Pandaria, he would remove the Forsaken from the tribe and destroy them, which would be the most beneficial to the Alliance. Now, Duque was doing a little useless work. The elites of the Forsaken were all wiped out in one go. At least on the surface, it seemed that a mere grand pharmacist had tricked all the elites of the Forsaken, including the Sun King. The combat power of the tribe was indeed weakened, but dying together in battle didn't affect the unity of the tribe. Instead, it made the tribe more united against a common enemy. If the tribe later found out that the Alliance had switched the soldiers, F***ck. No matter how good-tempered Duque was, he couldn't help but curse. Of course, what annoyed Duque the most was that Arthas also played a trick on him. Humph. Nowadays, even the Lich King has learned the cloning technique. This time, it was finally Arthas' turn to laugh. He laughed happily and arrogantly. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Duke Marcus, aren't you the one who calculates everything? I almost thought that you were the god of fate, invincible. Luckily. You are not, Duque retorted. Arthas, laugh if you want. You won't have many chances to laugh. In the sky, the elemental tides that belonged to different demigods were still colliding in midair, making continuous explosions. Without the soul voice, it was impossible to hear the voices of people 1 meter away. Arthes's voice continued to be transmitted into Duque's spirit sea. No, no, no. I'll definitely laugh until the end. However, Duque, don't you want to know why there are 2 Lich Kings? No need. I'll get the answer after I kill this you in front of me. Duque was unusually stubborn. Hee hee. Hee hee hee. Obviously, Dumbo laughed happily. Then, he seemed to sigh and murmured to himself, forget it. I wanted to let you keep guessing. However, this body seems to have reached its limit. With that, Arthes began to unravel the mystery on her own. He took off his head. He did not take off the black helmet that exuded a murderous aura. Instead, he took off the helmet along with his head. Just like how a knight in military uniform would place his helmet under his armpit, he clamped his head between his legs. Damn, Duque could not help but curse, a dignified Lich King has become a headless knight? Of course, Duque knew that all the Undying had the talent, split. Each of them was like Bucky the Clown in the One Piece manga. They would not die even if they were split into pieces. However, Duque knew that Zul valued Arthes not only because of Dumbo's soul, but also because of Dumbo's strong body. In this life, Duque had tricked Arthes again and again. He had broken his arm and cut his waist. The indomitable Arthes also reattached her body over and over again. Arthes's body had long been refined into a demigod's body on the ice-ceiling throne. Without his head, how could he bear it? 3 seconds later, the mystery was revealed. The arm wrapped in the gauntlet took out a crystal skull from the helmet. Chapter 1684. At this moment, the expressions on the faces of all those who witnessed this scene froze. Probably everyone had the same thought in their minds, holy shit. How could this happen? Others might not know what this ice crystal skull was. Duque must know. In order to punish Zul for being half-hearted and running away, Jaden played hardcore SM games with Zul. When Zul's body was completely destroyed, his bones turned to ashes, and he could no longer repair his cultivation, Zul's soul was stuffed into this ice crystal skeleton. This was a cruel punishment that just thinking about it made people feel horrible. Without a body, the soul also lost its freedom. It was bound in an ice skull, suffering day and night like a frozen hell of soul torture. This was the terrifying side of the ice skull. On the other hand, it was undeniable that this thing was also the most powerful soul power amplifier. With it, Zul's soul could control his undead subordinates from a super long distance. He could easily cross space and extend his soul touch thousands of miles away. Under the effect of the strengthened spiritual power, Zul could also perform super long-distance casting that mortals dared not imagine. Duque never thought that in order to trick him, Arthas would force a part of his soul into this crystal skull that his other half, Zul, refused to enter even if he was beaten to death. Sure enough, ambitious people were ruthless to others, but even more ruthless to themselves. Using a part of the Lich King's soul to control the crystal skull, he used the soul energy stored under the ice throne to directly shoot at Naxxramas, and then shot at Duque. As long as no one fought him in close combat, who would find out that this Lich King, who seemed to be so powerful, was actually a fake. As for Arthas's own body, he secretly ran to the City of Calamity to cause trouble. With such a diversion, it could be said that Duque's loss was not undeserved. Both sides had stopped fighting at the same time. Violent elemental turbulence was left in the surroundings, and under the impact of the Weave's mana, the ice elementals were like thousands of silver snakes twisting in a frenzy. Looking at each other from afar, the ice-crowned glacier was still as cold as ever, causing Duke's cloak to flutter. Duque suddenly interjected, "Arthes, you could have used this technique on a much larger scale. Who knows, he might be able to scam me even more ruthlessly. Is it worth it for you to catch an Anastrian and a Dranos? Worth it?" Arthes's image was projected on the crystal helmet, and there was a hint of laughter in her voice. A mere leader of the Forgotten Ones isn't worth my effort. I'm doing this for you. Duke Marcus, me? Duque was a little surprised. Yes. I have to admit, you are too scary. It's so terrifying that even though I've become a Lich King, I can still feel suffocated. No, it's an oppressive feeling that my soul could be annihilated at any moment. He was a little surprised that Arthes would actually admit to her cowardice. Huh. A playful expression appeared on Duque's face. I grew up listening to legends about you. Ever since I took charge, I've never won against you. Even after embarking on the path of a Death Knight, I've never won against you. You stole my lover. You took away the victory that belonged to me. Over and over again. Over and over again. Almost every step I took was predicted by you. Then, you gave me an incomparably painful blow. Speaking up to this point, the projection of Arthes touched her shoulders, and then touched her waist, where Duque had once broken them. When I fused with Zul to become a true Lich King, I not only gained power, but also an even more despairing experience of failure. It wasn't until that moment that he and I realized that you had already become a nightmare for both of us. You're simply the most hateful and terrifying nightmare. Your existence itself is the biggest obstacle to our hegemony. Duque's face was filled with the word embarrassment. The second fool continued to vent his emotions. In these 20 years, we've never won against you even once. Fighting against you is simply fighting against fate itself. We're not satisfied. So even if it's a small victory, I have to win against you, Duke Marcus. Hearing this, Duque only wanted to reply to the second fool, Motherf * King retard. Duque completely understood that these two poor fellows had already been abused like dogs by him, and had a serious psychological shadow. He didn't know if shivering plus shivering would become the square of shivering. In any case, for this kind of big villain, Duque didn't care if they died. Oh, no, they were already dead. Then let them eat *T. Perhaps, this was the general trend. The original Lich King Arthes in history was so domineering. Because of this, Duque had long planned to abuse him more and more fiercely over the years. Well, this could be counted as a big explosion of accumulation. An Arthes with a flaw in his heart was easier to deal with than the second fool who was full of confidence and arrogance. Now, in order to win against Duque once, he paid an unequal amount of power. How to put it? Duque shrugged and spread his hands. Well, you beat me once, I hope you can be so talented or so lucky next time. This confrontation could only end with a small victory for the Lich King. If the fight continued, Duque could at most crush the crystal skull. That thing could also be considered a divine artifact, but it was insignificant to Arthes, so Duque wasn't interested in destroying it. Now that he knew, he would be prepared in the future. The value of that thing was about the same as a pebble on the side of the road. In the City of Calamity, 100 kilometers away. After confirming that all the coalition forces in the City of Calamity were dead, Kale gave the order to open fire. This was destined to be in vain. As one of the few magic veins in the Ice-Crown Glacier area, the City of Calamity had an extremely strong supply of magic. With Arthes in charge, the bombardment of magic cannons was nothing more than a meaningless battle of elemental energy. Using elemental energy from afar to fight with elemental energy absorbed on the spot was as ridiculous and futile as using water from afar to put out a nearby fire. After venting for a while, Kale understood the reason. Without needing Duque's reminder, he directly ordered the Dalajan to retreat. After all, the Dalajan was not a purely offensive flying fortress. If too much of the magic net was overdrawn, in the end, the Dalajan would crash into the enemy's formation at any moment. This was not worth it. Seeing the Dalajan retreat, Arthes did not chase after them. With a wave of his hand, he directly ordered the remaining Scourge soldiers to retreat through the top of the Door of Death, Mordressa, to the evil castle of Malak Eris in the center of the Ice-Crown Glacier. Chapter 1685. In the northwest, the battle where Maligos was teaching Calegos how to be a dragon also ended before Alexstrasza arrived. Today, the dragon Lich could bully his own little brother, but he would never dare to fight his former big sister one-on-one. This time, the battle was over. It was hard to say who was the real winner. The defense line of the Ice-Crown Glacier that Lich King Arthas had maintained was completely broken. Although the west and northwest sides were not breached, the Alliance still managed to obtain the City of Calamity, an important strategic fulcrum on the plateau, on the east side of the defense line. Originally, the Calamity army could take advantage of the terrain and form a terrible strangulation formation with the Gate of Death as the center. Now, once the Alliance attacked, they had to fight a war of attrition with the Alliance on the relatively narrow bridge. On the other hand, the Calamity army's strength did not decrease, but increased. In addition to the loss of many giants in the direction of the Iron Wall Dam, after the new plague jointly developed by Maligos and Professor Putricide spread in the Battle of the City of Calamity, excluding those destroyed by the tanks of the mechanical gnomes, the Calamity army gained a total of 50,000 elites. Most of them were low-grade professionals. Even for the Calamity troop, which had a huge business, it was still a significant increase in strength. Originally, before Arthas left, he also removed the ice wall around the City of Calamity, hoping to further pollute the surrounding environment. Duque, who was prepared, hurriedly mobilized the Red Dragon Legion to burn the entire City of Calamity along with the plague. The battle on March 15 was over. The aftermath was still fermenting. What? You said that the Alliance seemed to be prepared for this. They only sent mechanical gnomes that wouldn't be affected by the plague into the City of Calamity, and then everyone on our side found out that the Alliance had replaced them? In Orgrimmar, Thrall clenched his fists after receiving the report. Anger? Maybe. But more than that, he was uneasy and confused. As soon as he turned around, Sal's tall body had already walked toward the magic mirror. There, a troll mage responsible for contacting the Alliance command immediately bowed to Sal. Trolls also had mages. As the ancestors of the Night Elves, trolls also had the qualifications to be mages. However, among the Darkspear trolls where Wujin was, there were not many trolls with the qualifications to be mages. Coupled with the lack of magic civilization, the number of great magi was even fewer. However, with the annihilation of the Forsaken army and the announcement of Varamasath, the Dreadlord who was now in control of the new Undercity, joining the Scourge army, the Forsaken mages had actually been forced out of the Horde's battle array. In reality, the Horde only had less than 1,000 Forsaken left. Trolls were generally not strong, and there wasn't even a Radiant Moon Wizard who could be called. He could only make do with it for now. Sal sighed and was about to speak when he heard Woking's voice coming from behind him. "Great Chieftain, are you going to confront Duque?" Sal didn't turn his head, but faced Woking with his stalwart back. "Yes. That's right. I just couldn't take this lying down. I wanted to ask Duque why he did it. Since he found out that the tribe has a plague weapon, he could have told me." Wokin's voice was low, and it was obvious that he was also quite depressed. "Don't ask." So what if he asked? It would only widen the rift between the Alliance and the Horde that had just begun to heal. "Great Chieftain, there is only one reason why he did this: the Alliance is the Alliance, and the Horde is the Horde." Sal seemed to be struck by lightning, and his whole body stiffened. Immediately, his mouth full of sharp teeth was filled with bitterness. Woking was indeed a man of great wisdom. He pointed out the key point in one sentence. Even after 10 years of relatively friendly and peaceful cooperation, it could not completely eliminate the estrangement between the two sides. The Alliance and the Horde were now allies. But these two behemoths were also two multiracial joint political bodies that had once fought a cruel war and had different interests. The alliance had made too many concessions, so many that even Sal, the great chieftain, was a little numb. Many times, he had forgotten the hatred and unhappiness of the past, and wishfully thought that this peace and cooperation could last forever. This time, there was no need to ask, it must be the alliance guarding against the horde. That was why Duque suddenly ordered the withdrawal of William's Eastern Army and replaced it with Mimiran's mechanical gnomes. On the other hand, wasn't the horde also guarding against the alliance? Among the horde, the voices of clamoring for war against the alliance had never stopped. Recently, with the emergence of problems such as the lack of land resources, this voice not only did not decrease, but instead became more and more intense. Sal, as a dove, went around putting out fires, but the more fires he put out, the more fires there were. Sal was simply mentally and physically exhausted. Woking pointed out the key point of the problem, but knowing the problem did not mean that it could be solved. It was completely foreseeable that the conflict would become even greater in the future. Looking at the history of the orcs, it was not difficult to find that the orcs were also very fertile. When the population was large, they would expand outward and beat up the foreign races. If there was really no place to expand, they would fight each other. Since ancient times, many clans had disappeared in the long river of history. The orcs did not care, it had been like this for hundreds of millions of years. However, the clear-headed Sal knew that this way of survival was extremely dangerous. The alliance was already a behemoth whose strength was far above the horde. Since the second battle of the Dark Portal, the alliance had not launched a war against the horde, not because they did not want to, but because there were stronger foreign enemies, and there was a wise leader like Duque to suppress the voices of opposition. Once the flames of war were ignited, the alliance would most likely not be burned to death, but the horde would definitely be destroyed. Sal was trying his best to maintain this fragile balance, trying to maintain peace with the alliance. If the group of traditional orcs below did not grow brains and continued to make trouble, then, Sal did not dare to think about it. In his mind, thousands of thoughts turned, and finally, Sal was discouraged. Woking, inform Duque for me. Say that the Horde Expeditionary Army has been hit hard and needs a long time to rest in place. I hope that supplies can be prepared. Understood. Woking humbly put one hand on his chest and bowed to Sal. However, he saw the figure of the great chief become extremely lonely. Alas! At the same time, in front of the frozen throne. One burly, one thin, two figures exuding terrifying dark energy fluctuations, just like that, crawled in front of the high white throne. The supreme voice of the Lich King floated down from the top of the throne. Anastrian, are you not convinced? The body of the former Sun King shook violently, and finally squeezed out a sentence from between his teeth, I dare not. Oh, you just don't dare? Accompanied by the cold voice, the palm print branded on the right side of the Sun King's face suddenly became as black as ink. It was obviously a dark color, but it exuded an extremely hot soul-burning pain, causing Anastrian to roll on the ground in pain. Ah! Chapter 1686. After a scream, Arthy's voice floated down again. I'll ask you again. Are you afraid, or are you not convinced? If he didn't dare to speak up. If he was not convinced, he would confront him. If Anastrian was still the chief of the tribe, at least there would be Sal in front of him. But now, he had no barriers. He could only use his frail body to face the Lich King who controlled the life and death of his soul. He trembled, and in his empty eye sockets, the two weak soul fires kept trembling, as if they were crying. I'm convinced. Of course I'm convinced. I am the most loyal servant of the Lich King. Having abandoned his integrity, the former Sun King was now nothing more than a humble and shameless soul. Arthy's was unmoved. He shook his head. In the past, Zul always liked to use absolute soul control. He used to think that as long as the living stepped into the realm of death, they would be under his absolute domination. Obviously, he was wrong. The Sun King trembled. Arthas held the chin of his helmet and tilted his head. You and your Forsaken once broke free from Zul's control. This is the best proof. So, for those who are worth cultivating, I prefer to let them slowly fall. Only the fall of one's own will is the deepest and most thorough fall. For example, the former me, the current Maligos, and the future you. The cold words pierced directly into the deepest part of Anastrian, making his soul tremble even more violently. Actually, I was a little surprised that you came to me. I don't know why you feel insecure in the tribe. Since you chose to make a deal, chose to become my subordinate, and desire power, I will not go back on my word. At this point, Arthas slowly walked down the ice throne. Every time she took a step, the metal leg guards would make a clattering sound as they collided with the icy surface. Each clattering sound was like a giant hammer pounding on Anastrian's soul. Arthas walked to stand in front of the Sun King. Raise your head, my servant. The Sun King was still trembling. He raised his rusty spine, so that his skeletal face was facing Arthas. He couldn't see anything. He could only see the two ghostly lights in the gaps of the helmet. If he could still swallow his saliva, he would be gulping right now. Unfortunately, he could not. It was a pressure and coldness that could even freeze souls. In front of Arthas, Anastrian felt that he was really too insignificant. It was only then that the Sun King noticed that Arthas was holding a crystal skull in her left hand. Arthas' cold laughter came from under the helmet, piercing directly into the soul of the Sun King. You want to rely on me, and I allow it. However, I will use my soul imprint to make it impossible for you to betray me. You wanted power, and I allowed it. But I never promised that I wouldn't make you feel pain. At this moment, Anastrian's entire body was shaking like a leaf. He could no longer control his soul and body. He couldn't even use a single drop of magical elements. With a death's grasp, Anastrian's entire skeleton was lifted up and suspended in mid-air. The Lich King laughed softly, sounding like a ghost. A full 10 years. My other soul is imprisoned in this small skull. It can't go anywhere, and I can't contact my own body at all. I can only endure extreme pain 100 times more than my physical body can endure day and night. I'm tortured by the cold, cramped, and extreme pain. Of course, this thing can also greatly increase your spiritual power. As long as you fuse with this thing, you will become a real demigod. Arthas' laughter grew louder. How is it? Are you happy? The new demigod Lich. No. In that secret deal, Arthas promised to make him a demigod. If he had known that this would happen, Anastrian would have continued to hide in the tribe. Even if his dirty deal with Jaden was exposed, he might still be able to hide in the new Undercity and resist stubbornly. Becoming like this was simply courting death. Come on. You should be happy. Duque has too many demigods under him. I also need more powerful demigods to help me. With that, Arthas pressed the ice skull that had imprisoned Zul on Anastrian's face. Crack, how did it feel to have the bones in his face slowly crushed inch by inch? Even though he was no longer alive and had lost his nervous system, the pain in his soul still made Anastrian on the verge of collapse. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He wanted to resist, but he couldn't. He could only watch helplessly as the seemingly fragile ice skull crushed his entire skull. He felt that he had lost something forever. He didn't know what it was, but he had a vague feeling that it must be something very important. After a full 5 minutes, Arthas finally crushed the poor thing's skull into powder. A cold gust of wind blew, and the bone powder scattered on the ground was blown away without a trace. Above the Sun King's body, there was now a completely different pure white skull of ice. The skeleton that had lost its life a long time ago, under the stimulation of the rampaging dark power, made rather funny convulsions. There were even many movements where the joints were twisted. Arthas suddenly wanted to laugh. He could laugh if he wanted to. Ha ha ha! The arrogant laughter that seemed to dominate everything in the world reverberated around the ice-ceiling throne, and then floated into the entire ice-crown fortress, echoing non-stop. All the high-level undead creatures that could express emotions were stunned at first. Then, they immediately followed Arthas and let out unpleasant owl-like laughter. Ha ha ha! Ha ha ha! How long did he laugh for? Arthas didn't know. He only knew that he was in an extremely good mood. Looking at the undead creature that was still convulsing laughably on the ground, Arthas instructed the Blood Queen, "When he returns to normal, I want all the information he knows. The Alliance, the Horde, and the Dragon's Slumber Shrine." Yes. The Blood Queen Lanais bowed. On the other side, the Alliance held an emergency throne meeting. There was a lot of discussion. Some wanted to slow down, while others wanted to fight fiercely. Obviously, no one could convince the other. The strength of the Calamity army was still terrifying. After taking down the city of Calamity, Arthas almost pulled out all the low-level undead creatures to attack the Alliance's position. According to a conservative estimate, there were still more than 1 million elite skeleton soldiers. The number of undead creatures of different levels could not be calculated at all. Anastrian and Delano joining the Calamity army also meant that a considerable amount of information had been leaked. Chapter 1687. With Anastrian and Dranos joining the Scourge, the Horde would naturally suffer the greatest blow. One of them controlled the tribe's communication network, while the other's father was the highest-ranking military commander under Thrall. Most of the time, Varrock was the one who controlled the most troops in the tribe. Unfortunately, as Nascent's army went into a resting state and the tribe hurriedly changed their communication system, Arthas didn't get much useful information. The Alliance had always been wary of the Horde, not to mention the Forsaken who had a direct grudge against them. If it weren't for Duque, Servanas would have already caused trouble for the Forgotten Ones. If Duque gave a hint with his eyes, Queen Sylvanas might even annihilate the Forsaken with the power of the entire country and the Night Elves. In fact, what Arthas wanted the most was the Weave. Without the Weave, the strength of the Alliance's mages would drop by at least half. It wasn't as if the Doomsday Army had never killed a mage from the Alliance before. Looking at the ferocious appearance of a certain mage when he was alive, throwing fireballs non-stop as if they were free. As soon as he turned into a lich, he was done for. The Weave had given the Alliance's mages too much support, to the point where it was like replacing a shotgun with a cannon. As long as he infused his overflowing spiritual force as the energy for the Weave to operate, he would be able to use the elements almost limitlessly in battle as long as he didn't exceed the upper limits of his tolerance. He didn't even need to communicate with the elemental plane. All the elements had been filtered, purified, and stabilized in the Weave. As long as a mage completed the last step of elemental modeling, they would be able to cast an offensive spell that was far beyond their combat level. The Weave was Duque's lifeline and was directly under Duque. Without mastering magical abilities that were above Duque's, there was no way he could snatch it. Speaking of creating something similar to the Weave to fight against the Weave, unfortunately, even with the two master magicians, Maligos and Anastrian, they still couldn't create the magic net that belonged to the Doomsday Army. This was what infuriated Arthas the most. It couldn't be helped. Although Holy Light and Shadow were two independent elemental energies, they were pure spiritual energy. There was no independent elemental realm outside the main plane. Among the four major elements, if one wanted to obtain more elements, one would need to have higher authority. On their side, except for Arthas who had a certain amount of authority in the water elemental realm, the other two didn't. Needless to say, the Sun King hadn't reached the god domain yet. Originally, Maligo still had some authority. Unfortunately, after he was cut in half, not only did he lose his authority, but he also lost his Titan rune. It was impossible for him to control the arcane energy that the Titan energy extended. Thus, her only hope was to create a weave of ice element and completely expel Duque's weave. Therefore, after the horde retreated, the battle between the allied forces and the Calamity army became the magical ley lines on the ice-crowned glacier. The Shadow Vault was one of them, and the Calamity City was another. The remaining nodes were not completely symmetrical on the map. Their positions were also quite easy to identify because the Calamity army had built strong fortifications on them long ago. They were, the prototype vault on the north side of the Desolation Gate, or Dusa, the vault on the west side of the Death Gate, Madresa, and the Dark Cathedral and the Ice-Crowned Glacier itself. Not only were they places that the military would fight for, but they were also the nodes of the magical ley lines. Everyone knew what was going on. It was just a matter of who could seize the opportunity first. For a few days, anyone with a little bit of magical sensing ability could feel that Arthas was expanding a new ice elemental energy weave with the Ice-Crown Fortress as the center. In contrast, Duque was also strengthening the ley lines in the Calamity City and the Shadow Vault to the north, using them as new nodes of the weave. On the 20th of March, in the Calamity City, Duque came for an inspection. The Calamity City had been burned to the ground. Although the Red Dragon army had purified the place with flames, no one could guarantee that there were still remnants of plague gas in a certain corner of the city. At this time, it was time for the non-human creatures and mechanical creations to appear. In the dilapidated city ruins, there were fire demons patrolling everywhere, as well as mechanical gnomes commanding mechanical spiders, tanks, and other mechanical creations. Duque supported his feet with the wind, opened the frost shield, and arrived at the center of the city. The gigantic ghost tower that had once existed here had already been dismantled and replaced by a Titan formation that was formed from countless golden Titan runes. Seeing Duque's arrival, Majordomo, the manager of the elemental emissaries under Duque, hurried to greet him. "Master." He bowed. He had once served the fire demon Ragnaros, and now he had completely adapted to his identity. It was rare for him to have a chance to appear, so he naturally did his best. "How's the progress?" Duque asked. "It wasn't ideal at first, but with their help, we've caught up." Them that Majordomo was referring to were naturally the water elementals that were helping beside the Titan rune magic circle. These water elementals were all huge, at least 3 stories tall. Interestingly, although water and fire were clearly incompatible, the water elementals and fire demons were at least restraining each other. Duque smiled. What he was doing now was to dig out the roots of Arthas. If he simply introduced the fire elementals from the fire elemental realm in an attempt to change the elemental ratio of this continent that was already covered in ice and snow, it would be arduous and unrewarding. Replacing Majordomo with the fire demon King Ragnaros might have a chance of success. So, Duque gave up on a simple confrontation and called upon the Haitian water elementals instead. As creatures of the water elemental realm, the Haitian water elementals did not like Ragnaros, nor did they like the water elementals or water elemental creatures being contaminated by Arthas' dark power. Duque easily reached a consensus with Duke Hadasis once again. The Haitian water elementals would help to draw away the overflowing frost elementals on the Ice-Crowned Glacier, and then Majordomo and the Red Dragon Legion would join forces to disrupt the magic veins in the Ice-Crowned Glacier area. This method of digging out the roots and cutting off the source was the most damaging. Duque was not in a hurry to let the alliance advance the battle line. Like a noose, he slowly cut off Arthas' wings. Last time, the alliance suffered a great loss because of Arthas' diversion. This time, Duque had learned his lesson. He placed a large number of troops in the Shadow Vault and the City of Calamity, and withdrew the main force in other places, leaving only symbolic defense, and they were all mechanical gnomes and mechanical dwarves. If you have the ability, why don't you turn these robots into undead creatures? In the Shadow Vault, in addition to the Black Edge Knights, there were now the 4 guardians of Alkavan working together to guard it, plus Hodier, Onyxia, Vashch, and Kalegos. Chapter 1688. Naxxramas hovered in the air a little further north of the Shadow Vault, repairing itself. In Calamity City, Alexstrasza and Mimiron were in charge, with Alun helping to keep an eye on the screen from time to time. Duque was in charge of mobility. The rest of the Alliance had all retreated far away. After the Dalajan demolished the Iron Wall Dam, they returned to the Crystal Song Forest, maintaining a position to provide support at any time. Varian's troops retreated back to the Silver Arena to continue training. The Allied armies were advancing with such patience that Arthas couldn't find a single opportunity to strike. He had sent a large number of low-level undead to play with the Sea of Corpses, but there were flying warships above, dragons at low altitudes, and Mimiron's mechanical army on the ground. There was no way to get the corpses of creatures, which meant that the scourge couldn't be replenished. Arthas didn't send his elites, which meant that he was actually fighting a war of attrition with Mimiron. He wouldn't be able to add any more undead to use up the metal ingots in Mimiron's warehouse. Originally, the scourge's characteristic of having more and more undead was shameless enough. Mimiron's characteristic of having unlimited metal ingots was simply the scourge's greatest nemesis. Second Fool was so angry that he wanted to curse. On this side, the main force of the Alliance was restraining Arthas. On the other side, a certain dreadlord in Winterspring was suffering. Perhaps many beastmen in the tribe weren't interested in crossing the ocean and traveling thousands of kilometers to the north. But the tribe wouldn't tolerate betrayal. While Northren's tribal army was resting, Sar directly summoned his direct subordinate clan, the army of the Frostwolf clan, along with the armies of the Blood Elves and Night Elves, to form an alliance and enter Winterspring to quell the rebellion. At this point in time, Winterspring's terrain was rather disgusting. It was a classic example of a place that was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Winterspring, located in the northeasternmost part of the Kalimdor continent, was surrounded by mountains. Steep cliffs up to 1,000 meters high made this land of ice and snow seem even more harsh. In a sense, Anastrian hiding in Winterspring after escaping from Gloom City wasn't necessarily a disgust for the Alliance, or more accurately, a disgust for the Night Elves. This was because a barren land like Winterspring was disliked by the Night Elves who worshipped nature and had druid teachings. To the northwest of Winterspring was the Night Elves' druid holy land, Moonlight Woodland. To the west was the northern end of Fellwood Forest. To the southwest was Mount Hyjal. The reason why the Sun King decided to build the new Undercity here was probably because of the old grudge between his father, Dasrima Sunstrider, who had been banished by the Night Elves. He also wanted to act as a nail for the tribe and stick it firmly on the edge of the Night Elves' territory. Normally speaking, the only way to enter Winterspring was through the northern end of Fellwood Forest, passing through Timbermaw Fortress, which was the territory of the bear monsters. With the development of technology and a certain queen who hated the Forgotten became the semi-god of wind. Everything changed. Between 2 points, a straight line is the shortest. Disregarding the terrain, the main city of the Horde, Orgrimmar, was actually separated from Winterspring by Azhara. Now that Azhara was one of the most important ports in the Alliance, there were many flying battleships. When Thrall led 20,000 Frostwolf clan warriors to Azhara, he was shocked to find that Feather Moon General Chandris was leading 5,000 Night Elf Sentinels, as well as 10,000 mixed troops led by Sylvanas were already waiting there. Thrall sighed inwardly. He really didn't know what he had done to deliberately accept the Forgotten in order to nail a nail in the Alliance. The Alliance didn't protest, but in fact, the leaders of the Alliance were very unhappy. At that time, Thrall said that he was gambling, but it wasn't as if he didn't want to anger the Alliance. At that time, when they were fighting in Draenor, Thrall felt a little pleased when he saw the Alliance leaders gritting their teeth and feeling helpless. Now, because of the betrayal of some of the Forgotten, the tribe actually wanted him to pull out this nail. That kind of feeling almost made Thrall sick with anger. On the surface, Duque couldn't leave because he had to deal with Arthas. But of all the people he could have sent, why did he have to send Sylvanas, who had a deep hatred for Anastrian? Wasn't this a slap in the face? Seeing the sour expression of revenge on that pretty face, Thrall felt a pain in his balls. He really doubted that after this battle, he didn't know if he could find one or two intact pillars in the new Undercity. He couldn't not call the Alliance. The king of Galan, Gruul, didn't listen to orders, and the rest of the Taurens and Trolls had suffered a great loss in the last Kiraj swarm incident. The lost population couldn't be made up for in such a short period of time. The only orcs who still had enough soldiers had already lost more than 100,000 in Northrend. Warsong and Blackstone of the tribe's three major clans had also suffered heavy losses there. In the end, only the Frostwolf clan could fight. This was the last army Thrall could fight at this stage, and it was Thrall's own clan. Relying on the Frostwolf clan alone to charge into that damned place buried deep underground in the new Undercity would definitely be a huge loss. After thinking about it, he could only pull in the Alliance. To be safe, Thrall had brought the Tauren chieftain Kane and the Troll chieftain Woken to besiege the new Undercity. It could be said that all the elites were out. It's getting late. To prevent those damn traitors from escaping, let's set off early, Queen Sylvanas said with a beaming smile. Thrall could only pretend that he didn't see Queen Sylvanas' expression and nodded heavily. With a wave of his hand, the Frost Wolf warriors immediately split into 100-man squads and boarded the flying transport ships that had been prepared in advance. On the other side, in the Winterspring Valley, in the new Undercity of the Frostwhisper Canyon in the southeasternmost part of the Winterspring Valley, the royal apothecary Putre was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. Idiot! Calm down. Stop spinning. Sitting on the throne that used to belong to the Sun King, the Dreadlord angrily rebuked. Variamatha. Didn't you say that if we betrayed the tribe, we would immediately receive the protection of the Scourge army? Where's Arthas? Putre waved his arms in agitation. If you're so afraid of destruction, you shouldn't have opened the portal to return to the new Undercity. You should have directly followed Arthas. The Dreadlord sneered. What a joke. My collection, my research manuscripts are all here. And didn't His Majesty Anastrian say that the new Undercity would become the bridgehead for the Scourge army to conquer Kalimdor? Where are the soldiers of the Scourge army now? Variamatha was also annoyed. They hadn't participated in the negotiations, so they had no idea what the Sun King and the Lich King had discussed. In any case, they all felt like they had been cheated. What made them most depressed was that the geographical location of the new Undercity was a bit tricky. Chapter 1689. 10 years ago, when Anastrian left Lordaeron with the defeated remnants of the Forgotten, there were no flying battleships. The Alliance Air Force was dominated by griffins. Therefore, the location of the new Undercity was chosen in the disgusting terrain of the Frostwhisper Canyon. By land, it was normal to first pass through Timbermaw Fortress, have a friendly exchange with the ferocious Timbermaw Bear, and then follow the smoothest road under the valley, all the way east, bypassing Perpetual Moon Town, playing games with the frozen Chimera on the way, playing games with an army of blue dragons, and then being beaten half to death by wandering yetis before finally arriving at the Frostwhisper Canyon, which was easy to defend and difficult to attack. In Winterspring, where the terrain was dozens of degrees below zero and the terrain was complex, tanks, vehicles, and cannons were not useful. If you want to come in, use infantry to kill people. It should have been like this. Unfortunately, the emergence of the flying battleship broke all the old military common sense. The Alliance army didn't need to specifically go to Timbermaw Fortress. I flew directly over the mountains from Azhara. Originally, flying a spacecraft in the mountains was also a considerable risk, because the closer to the mountains, the more wind passed through the mountains or canyons, and then the turbulence formed. It was easy for the spacecraft to lose control and crash. However, the Alliance had Queen Sylvanas. As a demigod of wind, Sylvanas might not be able to summon a gale and double the speed of the entire fleet, but if she were to sense the direction and speed of the wind, she would be able to give the fleet the most accurate direction. That would be an easy task. After Sal led the warriors of the Frostwolf clan on the transport ship, just 4 hours later, the Alliance army fleet had arrived over the Frost Whisper Canyon. The cold wind was whistling, and the chill was like a knife scraping his face. Riding on a wyvern, Sal was deep in thought. He felt as if he had returned to more than a decade ago, when he found his lost Frostwolf clan compatriots in the hidden valley of the Alterac Mountains. Very easily, Sal took Wajin and his guards and found the spaceship where Sylvanas was. It was the largest battleship in the fleet. It was not a standard battleship of the Alliance, but a gift from Duque to his lover. The decorations of this ship alone cost 10 times the cost of an ordinary battleship. Her beauty was almost dazzling, which was a typical elven style. Although the blood elves were born from the high elves, they were still of the same lineage. The ship's golden paint was mostly made up of fiery red hollow metal fittings. The huge propellers were covered by flying wing-shaped decorations. From afar, it looked like a pair of dragon eagle wings. It was as flashy as it could get. Even if they were 3 or 5 kilometers away, they would definitely recognize him. The Alliance had already played around with the flying battleships, but the Horde's flying battleships had only just begun. In fact, the Horde already had a few flying battleships, but they were obsolete models that the Alliance no longer wanted. The tribe owed the Alliance a huge debt that they couldn't pay. Only the rusty water conglomerate bought it for imitation. The results of the imitation weren't good. Due to the lack of an industrial foundation, many of the parts could only be polished by the gnome craftsmen. Gnomes were known to be sloppy in both inventing and working. It looked like the same thing, but it was completely different when used. Several tests of flying into the air ended in failure, and 3 imitations of the flying battleships crashed. It didn't matter if he couldn't imitate it. This group of brain-dead gnomes also courted death. They forcibly repaired a good ship and turned it into a broken ship. When Wajin shamelessly asked the gnome craftsman to repair it and found the problem and reported it to Wajin, the gnomes refused to admit it, which made Wajin angry. As a result, the only usable flying battleship in the entire tribe was left in Orgrimmar. The gnomes were not without contributions. At least, they made the gnome airship. That thing was an improved version of the gnome's hot air balloon from more than 20 years ago. Although the failure rate of each flight was constant at 100% and the crash rate was 20%, after Sal limited the flying height of the gnome airship to not exceed 20 meters from the ground, there were not many deaths. For the time being, it met the needs of long-distance flight. However, it was infuriating to compare with others. Why were the gnomes of the Alliance so much more reliable than the gnomes of the Horde? While he was a little confused, Sal and his party flew to Queen Sylvia's flagship, Windrunner. In a sense, the Windrunner was a combination of a spaceship and a gunship. Unlike the existing flying battleships of the Alliance, the entire upper deck of the Windrunner was empty. The front half was a flat flight deck with 6 sloping entrances towards the stern for birds to enter and exit. The back half was a landing area. In addition to the normal landing area, there were several huge fishnet-like things that could be bounced up. The inspiration came from the grappling rope that an aircraft carrier used to quickly stop an aircraft. The middle deck was also a medium cannon with a firing range of only 180 degrees and a hemispherical cover that surrounded the entire ship. Those covers were actually magic cannons. Compared with the kinetic cannons that used gunpowder, the magic cannons were not weaker. Unfortunately, because of the elemental dissipation, the range of the magic cannons was shorter. In contrast, the magic cannons did not have much recoil. Only under the ship were a few triple 283mm kinetic cannons, which were of pod design. Looking at the new equipment of the Alliance, Sal could only feel envy in his heart. The difference was too great, he could not even be jealous. The wyvern flapped its wings and landed on the flight deck. Thrall jumped down and saw a familiar elven general, Haduran Brightwing. Her Majesty the Queen is waiting for you on the bridge. Please come with me. Okay. Sal said, and Dworkin and the guards followed. Perhaps it was considering that every flagship needed to carry out multiracial joint operations. The door where the bridge was located was quite large, 3.5 meters high, and ordinary Taurens could easily enter. Opening the door, Sal quickly saw two elves, surrounding a three-dimensional topographic map and pointing. Sal, we need detailed information about the new Undercity, the more detailed, the better. Duque sent a big guy, if we are lucky, this thing can save us thousands of lives. Sal and Dworkin looked at each other and sighed at the same time. After the Undercity was blown up, the Forsaken fell into a state of madness. The new Undercity's defense was even more fierce. The underground passages were curved, and no matter how many people were killed, it would not be enough to attack. However, traitors must pay the price, otherwise, anyone could betray in the future. It was because the tribe had to severely punish traitors and did not want to pay the price of too many elites, that there was room for the Alliance to intervene. Dworkin stepped forward. The core area of the new Undercity is located 300 feet below the Frostwhisper Canyon. Chapter 1690. Woken introduced the situation of the new Undercity to the two female elven leaders. First, we need to go through a magic elevator that is 150 feet deep to reach the main passage in the periphery. Note that this elevator is also a killing trap. There were special winches at the top and bottom of the elevator. If one did not enter from the inside of the elevator, once the trap on the elevator was activated, everyone would be hanged to death. That's why we can't use a simple lift to reach the main passage. Then, there's a horizontal passage here, but their vents feel a little strange. Now that their royal pharmacist has betrayed them, it's impossible. I'm afraid they'll spread plague gas through the ventilation holes. After passing through the main passage, there is a downward slope. Previously, we took a diagonal elevator down, but I saw that there was more than one set of rolling stones on the top of the elevator. If there are enemies, this slope is not safe. Oh, I heard that in order to prevent the dwarves from digging in, they drew an underground hot spring river that doesn't freeze. If they dig in carelessly, the tunnel will fill with water in minutes. Then, Wajin talked for 10 minutes in one go and marked the routes he knew as much as possible on the 3D map. Servanas and Chandris felt their scalps go numb after hearing this. If they used elite soldiers to force their way through, it was unknown how many people would have to die before they could settle it. No wonder the damned master pharmacist and the dreadlord refused to leave without any reinforcements. It was because this mouse hole was the most powerful and safest place. Queen Sylvie made a pressing gesture with her hands and said, "Well, let's not discuss these details first." No discussion? Sal and Wajin were stunned. After all, the vanguard this time was a Frost Wolf Beastman. The Alliance doesn't care about the lives of the Frost Wolf Beastmen? It was Chandris who explained, no, entering the city is the last step. Let's open up a path with bombs first. Bombing? Could it be that the Alliance's cannonballs could already threaten 300 feet underground? This thought made the two tribal leaders shudder. Queen Sylvanas raised her hand, and an elf mage of the royal family immediately opened a magic mirror. The mirror showed a huge spherical bomb. The Red Dragon Queen, Alexstrasza, is very angry at those who spread the plague. This was a blasphemy against life and nature. Such a person must be punished with destruction. Therefore, she asked the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu to make this magic bomb called Fatty. When this thing explodes, it can produce an effect equivalent to 60% of Nozdormu's combat power. Sal and Wajin didn't know how terrifying Nozdormu's 60% power was. However, a mysterious dragon king who had mastered the power of time always made people feel that it was amazing even though they did not understand it. Of course, Nozdormu isn't willing to kill or destroy anything in this world. Because it would go against his duty, I asked Duque to help me prepare the second bomb, little boy. At this point, when she used the magic mirror to show the second big bomb, Queen Sylvanas' beautiful lips curled into a resentful smile. It was a smile of extreme anger. Little boy? Sal could not understand the bad taste of a transmigrator who regarded explosions as art. Queen Sylvie shrugged. Duke and Magni created this horrible thing. Nobody knows how powerful it is except for them. The second bomb in the picture had a completely different feeling from the first one. The first, Fatty, gave Sal the feeling of mystery, that kind of unknown uncertainty, like a whisper, always teasing his heart, making him eager to see what would happen when Fatty exploded. The second, little boy, had a violent and restless aura. Even through the screen, Thrall, who had already begun to study the path of shamans, could clearly feel that the amount of fire elemental energy that Duke had compressed in this thing was definitely astronomical. Sylvanas asked seriously, "Let me confirm one last time. In order to punish the tribe's traitor Putre and the Forgotten Ones who betrayed the tribe, it wouldn't matter if the Alliance launched a powerful attack and blew up New Gloom City, right? Even if Winterspring becomes a dangerous place, is that right?" Sal and Wajin looked at each other and then nodded at the same time. Yes. Sal had to make such a decision. The warriors of the Frostwolf clan were his last hope. If even the Frostwolf was destroyed, he would not be able to control the situation. And Winterspring, actually had nothing to do with the tribe. The Forsaken Ones had never truly ruled over this place or occupied some of the mines. It was extremely cold here, and there were many magic beasts. Even the Frostwolf beastmen did not want to live here. Moreover, this place was completely isolated by the Alliance. It was a complete enclave. In the past, the Forsaken could still be used as a nail to make things difficult for the Alliance. Now that even the Forsaken had rebelled, there was no point in restraining the enclave. Sal couldn't move his entire Frostwolf clan here, and then every time there was a tribal exchange or something, he had to look at the Alliance's face before he could cross the border, right? When Sal agreed to the Alliance's decision, the fate of the new Undercity was sealed. There was no organized air force in the new Undercity. There was no need to fight at all, and the Alliance gained air supremacy. Under the cover of a group of flying battleships, a big-bellied spaceship flew unsteadily over the Frostwhisper Canyon. Then, it opened its huge metal belly, revealing the bomb that was the size of a small house. Fatty. Fire. Following Queen Seath's order, the huge magic bomb began a free fall at an altitude of 1 kilometer. At this moment, when the bomb fell to the ground, it felt like the inner liner of a thermos bottle had exploded. It was as if a layer of liquid or gas had spread across the ice layer at the bottom of the Frostwhisper Canyon the moment the bomb exploded. It seemed useless, but after a few seconds, whether it was Sal, Queen Seath, or all the Alliance soldiers who were watching this scene had a shocked look on their faces. In the entire Frostwhisper Canyon, every iceberg, every steep wall, every rock covered in ice and snow on the ground silently melted. It was like a huge bunker made of sand was directly blown away by the wind. Under the guidance of Queen Seath, the cold wind blew from west to east, directly blowing away the rock and ice wall that had turned into powder. This scene was like an invisible giant spoon, easily digging out the Frostwhisper Canyon again and again. Only then did everyone remember that the Space Dragon King Nozdormu had never shown his true form in front of outsiders. He only summoned quicksand from around him to build his body. Chapter 1691. It was just that no one had thought that Nozdormu's ability to turn everything into sand and then transform it into his own body would be terrifying when used in ordinary battles. No matter how strong a castle was, it could not withstand the erosion of time. No matter how thick the rock layer was, it could not withstand the tide of sand transformation. So what if it was 300 feet? Right now, just by looking at it, at least 250 feet of frozen earth and rock layers had been directly turned into sand, blown away by the fierce winds that lingered in Winterspring Valley. Looking at Nozdormu's rarely exposed power, looking at the bow of the Windrunner, looking at the Elf Queen's golden hair dancing wildly as she summoned the wind, Sal and Wajin were so shocked that they could not say a word. As if he had already expected the power of Nozdormu's move, when the entire Frostwhisper Canyon was almost dug out, the second transport ship with a big belly flew shakily to the top of the new Undercity. It was completely in front of Sal. Sylvanas laughed loudly in front of a group of blood elves. His laughter was full of wanton and hatred. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Anastrian, you betrayed your people for your ridiculous immortality. Do you really think that no one can deal with your shamelessness? Do you really think that the Blood Elves can't take revenge on you just because you found a new backer? Let me tell you, this is wishful thinking. It's not that the time hasn't come yet. The time has come, all of them will be avenged. Ha 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 ha, the Blood Elves laughed along. The elves were arrogant. For thousands of years, they had always boasted that they were a great race that stood at the peak of civilization. However, this great race suffered the most serious setbacks in the second and third battles of the Dark Portal. The Long Song Forest was destroyed twice, and even Silvermoon City was bombed. Their king even threw himself into the arms of the undead king for immortality. The humiliation of having their glory trampled on and the humiliation of being betrayed had always weighed heavily on the hearts of the elves. Times had changed, and the elves had to follow the trend and throw themselves into the arms of the Alliance under the leadership of Sylvanas. However, with their long lives, they had never forgotten this embarrassment. Many times, even the support from the Alliance was seen as charity. However, this emotion was well guided by Sylvanas' subordinate, Rothelma Theron. The anger in the hearts of the people needed a target to vent, and the Sun King, who had betrayed the people in pursuit of immortality, was the best target. If he had forcibly changed his mind after being killed, it might have been forgivable. However, he was pressured and persuaded to voluntarily transform into a lich as a living being. This sin could never be washed away. In fact, after the Forsaken joined the Horde, the Alliance forbade the Blood Elves from deliberately causing trouble for the Forsaken. The Blood Elves hated the higher-ups of the Alliance because of this. Now that they had finally gotten their revenge, the Blood Elves immediately let out wild cheers. At this moment, this scene was being broadcasted to the entire Sin Dorii kingdom by Queen Sylvie using magic. With the prior announcement, the people all knew that today, their queen would lead an army to wipe out those traitors. All right. Well done. Blow up those traitors. In the entire Sin Dorii kingdom, the people were excited. They held Sylvanas' portrait high, and at the same time, they burned dummies with Anastrian's name in various large squares. In the Dalajan city, Prince Kale looked at the images from all over the Sin Dorii kingdom. At this moment, all the high elves in the Dalajan were anxious. In front of his supporters and the neutral elves, he also burned a dummy of his father, and then announced a decision that he had been preparing for a long time. I, Kale, that Sunstrider, officially announced today that I will abandon the surname Sunstrider. I will give myself a new surname, Eversong. To be honest, Kale, that's Eversong did not sound domineering at all. However, this represented Kale, that's political attitude. It symbolized that he had completely severed his identity as a prince, and he would never inherit the political legacy of his father. The surname Eversong, which represented the Eversong Forest, was more neutral. It not only expressed his attachment and love for his hometown, but also showed that he was closer to the Ranger faction. He could be the president of the Daligen, but in the end, when his destiny was over, Kale, that still thought that he could return to his roots. His political signal was responded to by the Queen. "Lore, that's came." She opened a portal and nodded at Kale, "That's." He nodded at Kale, "That's," stayed for a few minutes, and then left without saying anything. Everyone knew that this meant that the ruling Ranger faction had accepted Kale, that's and his followers. Above the Frost Whisper Canyon, the big bomb with the words, "For the traitor," written in Elvish text slowly fell and began to free fall under the gaze of tens of thousands of elves in the magic mirror of the live broadcast. A moment later, a terrifying light that seemed to be able to burn the retinas of mortals lit up below. It was a dazzling light that was like the rising sun. With a loud rumble, a small mushroom cloud rose in the canyon. A huge shockwave directly swept up an even higher and more terrifying cloud of dust and stones, rushing in all directions. At that moment, the sky and the earth lost color. In the political fleet in the sky, no one made a sound. Everyone was deeply shocked by this exaggerated scene. In the Naxxrama's command post, Duque curled his lips. "It's not a day of nuclear annihilation yet." The data in the system prompt made Duque a little unhappy. In the eyes of others, this was already very terrifying. But the system data said, it's equivalent to 2,000 tons of TNT. Duque scratched his head. Sure enough, if it's not nuclear energy, it won't be that powerful. A few years ago, Duque used the system to clean up the little stuff in his head, and after a long time of pointing and pointing, the Alliance completed the research of TNT and the emergence of modern artillery. However, the more advanced theory of the atomic bomb was not something that a college student like Duque could come into contact with. Knowing the most superficial principles didn't mean having the knowledge and industrial foundation to research. The technology tree had already climbed to an exaggerated level, and if the steps were forcibly pulled any further, it would pull the balls. Compressed fire elements with demigod-level magic power and loaded with 10 tons of TNT, this was already the limit of what conventional weapons could achieve. However, it's good that there's no nuclear radiation. At least we can dismantle those bones in the new Undercity. In the video, the last layer of rock blocking the top of the new Undercity had been destroyed. In the gradually settling smoke and dust, everyone could see the upper buildings of the new Undercity. Queen Sylvanas jumped down first. She turned into a terrifying tornado and blew away all the small gravel blocking the gap. There was no need for her to give any instructions. The other commanders on the battlefield easily found a way to break through. Kill, destroy those traitors. For the blood debt of Sin Dorii. Chapter 1692. It had to be said that Anastrian had really put in a lot of effort for this new nest. In the absence of human resources, it could be said that he had made full use of the mechanics. It was just that his poor imagination had limited the construction of the new Undercity. He had never imagined that the 100-meter rock stratum that he relied on as an absolute barrier would be broken in such a way. No matter how many traps he had set up outside the new Undercity, what was the use of them? They would not pass through your traps at all, and would directly enter the deepest part of your nest. Unless you had a bunch of big bombs hidden in your house and were prepared to die together with your enemies, the Forsaken who had participated in this betrayal would definitely kneel down. Seeing the Beastmen and Blood Elf army descending from the city dome that was supposed to be a rock stratum, the Forsaken were all frightened. Ah! Don't kill me. I've been kidnapped. A Forsaken shouted. Unfortunately, what greeted him were the golden warhammers of the Blood Elf paladins, the holy golden arrows of the Blood Elf rangers, and even the giant axes of the Beastmen warriors. Hijacked? Innocent? Perhaps it was. But everyone knew that those who had nothing to do with the great potion master Putre had long been killed by his new plague in the Battle of the Calamity City, and had returned to the Lich King's command. The rest were either his hardcore accomplices, or at least neutrals, who knew what had happened but did not report it. It was not that Tsar had not thought of screening these guys. After all, the tribe still needed the Forsaken mages. But Wujin reminded him that the anger of the beast men being betrayed could only be extinguished by destruction and death. In any case, the Blackrock tribe had been betrayed again. This was an ironclad fact. The last time was the incident of the Blackhand brothers 20 years ago. For glory, for the discipline of the army, and for the stability of the tribe, Varrock Salyafar, who had already set off for Northrend, would definitely suppress the remaining Blackrock beastmen and other beastmen from other clans who had been deceived in the Calamity City that day. But every pair of eyes was watching the great chief's every move. The beastmen could allow those who disagreed to leave, but they absolutely could not tolerate this kind of betrayal on the battlefield. Therefore, the elite assault troops led by the Frostwolf clan were even more ruthless than the Blood Elves. Besides, you claimed that you were innocent, yet you had the right to move freely in the new Undercity when you announced that you were leaving the tribe. Who were you trying to fool? None of the Forgotten Ones still in the new Undercity were innocent. When the huge battle axe descended, the Undyings whose muscles had long since lost their tenacity were torn apart. His head was chopped into a rotten watermelon, his arms and legs were cut off like broken firewood, and his body was like a rotten rag bag, with the blackened and withered organs falling out. Blood-curdling screams and wails of despair could be heard everywhere. It was the same for the beastmen and the Blood Elves. There were no surrenders, and all the corpses of the Forgotten Ones were completely destroyed. The Blood Elf priests and holy knights who followed up immediately sprinkled holy light and holy water, purifying all souls that could turn into vengeful spirits. Ha ha ha. Servanas brandished the divine artifact longbow, Solidar stars of fury, and happily slaughtered the Forsaken. That's right, he wasn't shooting arrows. Instead, he was using the curved structure of the longbow to slash the fleeing Forsaken with a martial technique that resembled a machete. They were directly breached from the inside. Coupled with the huge explosion of the great bomb, many of the tunnels collapsed. The Forsaken ran around like blind flies before they were killed by the Allied forces that caught up to them. No! Great Chief, don't kill me, I can serve you. The captured royal pharmacist Putre screamed in fear. Serve you? Go to hell and be a slave to your traitorous compatriots for millions of years. In front of the accompanying troll mages and under the live broadcast of the magic mirror, Sal grabbed Putre's collar and ruthlessly threw him to the ground. The heavy and enormous combat boots stomped on Presley's waist, and with a crisp crack, that guy's entire lumbar vertebra and pelvic bones exploded. This is the fate of traitors. Sal roared domineeringly, raising the hammer of destruction in his hand. Through the magic mirror, the beast men who were still resting in Northrend could clearly see their great chief's black hammer ruthlessly smashing the head of that damned traitor into a rotten watermelon. A rotten watermelon that had expired. Every beast man raised their arms or weapons at this moment, letting out deafening roars. Well done. Kill the traitor. This is the price of betrayal. On the other side, Servanas found the Dreadlord Verimithas. Almost as soon as she saw him, Queen Sylvanas felt as if she was in a predestined battle. She did not know that this sinister-looking demon in front of her would become her subordinate in the original space and time. She also did not know that in the gates of heaven's wrath, he had also betrayed her. At this point in time, Queen Sylvanas only knew that this disgusting guy in front of her was one of the main culprits who had participated in the destruction of Longsong Forest and Silvermoon City. No, I can. The Dreadlord had no moral integrity. Perhaps other demons hated death, but they were not too afraid of it. Verimithas was different. Back then, he had entered Azeroth as a supervisor of the Scourge army. Later, after Archimonde died, he and the other Dreadlords first sought refuge with Arthas, and then were instigated by Anastrian. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was a slave of 3 different surnames. It would be better if he did not die, but once he died, his soul would be forced back into the twisting nether. Although the 3 leaders of the Burning Legion were now kneeling, who could guarantee that they would not come back to deal with him when they resurrected in the future? Thus, he knelt before Queen Sylvanas on the spot. Unfortunately, if Sylvanas was the Forsaken Queen who had just taken over the Forsaken in the original history and was extremely lacking in power and helpers, she might have tolerated him. Now that she was the demigod of Azeroth, the true queen of the elves, and the partner of the Alliance Commander Duque, did she need a slave of 3 different surnames to be her subordinate? Stop joking. Sylvanas did not even care about him. All she wanted was destruction and revenge. Good for the Scourge army. Good for the Forsaken. Good for the demons. Destroy them all. Wind elements completely exploded from Queen Sylvanas' body. A violent aura, overflowing with divinity, almost filled every corner of this dark palace. When he saw the lightning bursting from Queen Sylvanas' divine longbow, the Dreadlord no longer had any hopes of getting lucky. He pounced over, and with a wave of his hand, a large ball of stinky, rotten bee swarm was thrown over. Unfortunately, the dazzling lightning arrived with a loud rumble, turning everything in the large room into nothingness. The violent thunderbolts destroyed everything. Chapter 1693. The mighty Dreadlord had been blasted into smithereens by Queen Sylvie's furious attack. No, there were 2 pieces of hooves left, but Riadaline, the leader of the Blood Elf Paladins, opened a portal to catch up with the second half of the battle. She directly went up with a big hammer and threw something like God's Wrath, smashing Verimithas into nothing. Demons were not afraid of dying from ordinary elemental attacks, but as a spiritual energy type of holy attacks, the demons were very hurt. Perhaps there would be a day when Verimithas would make a comeback, but mortals would not be able to see it anyway. There might be remnants of the Forsaken in those secret passages, and there might be powerful undead such as the Abomination hiding in dark corners. But it was the tribe's business to clean up the remnants. If the Alliance stayed here for too long, it would be a bit of a slap in the face. That night, after the battle, Queen Sylvanas withdrew with her people. The Elven army was also the main force against the Scourge. After pulling out this nail that was likely to cause a disaster, the Alliance could finally concentrate all its forces against the Scourge. While Queen Sylvanas and Sal were annihilating the traitors, many battles broke out in the Ice-Crown Glacier. There was no winning or losing, it was simply a matter of exhausting the opponent's war potential. In order to overturn the Scourge, Duque asked Willan to come forward and transfer 2 Naru. One was in charge of Naxxramas, and the other was in charge of the Dalajan. Using the 2 floating cities as bases, they produced a large amount of holy water. Cannonballs were covered with holy water, weapons were covered with holy water, and even in all the upwind directions of the Ice-Crown Glacier, Duque had people pour a large amount of low-purity holy water. The Scourge looked like they wanted to poison all the creatures in the world with a plague. The Alliance army looked like they wanted to purify all of Northrend with holy light. During this period, around the evil castle, Merrick Eris, there were many battles between the Alliance army and the Scourge. The biting cold wind blew the ice dust on the frozen plateau, and the cold fog rolled up like 1,000 layers of waves, layer upon layer, surging into the distance. In the wind that whistled like ghosts all year round, a large number of humanoid objects were slowly moving forward against this icy wind. Even in spring, the temperature in the Ice-Crown Glacier would not be higher than 0 degrees. The cold wind rolled up the ice dust and blew the armor of this group of humanoid objects, and the cold wind invaded their bodies, but they still did not feel it. Because they had all died a long time ago. Woo woo woo. A shrill alarm sounded from the east side of the mountain wall. The mountain wall that seemed to be a part of the dead world suddenly came to life. Countless people came out of the caves and tunnels and quickly entered the designated positions. These bones are coming every hour. They're really not tired of it. A soldier teased. Shut up. If we didn't have enough troops to rotate, we would have become like them. An alliance officer scolded his subordinate. This was a plateau close to the Gate of Death, Mordressa, in the east of the Ice-Crown Glacier. At this moment, the Scourge soldiers were gradually approaching the Alliance's position on the eastern mountain wall. They were the first to enter the range of the cannons. Katyusha, fire 3 consecutive shots. The highest commander of the camp, Lilith Windrunner, ordered calmly. Orders from General Windrunner. Katyusha, fire 3 bursts. The colonels and lieutenants in charge of each sector gave their orders. Although the large-caliber cannons were very powerful and could kill all the Undying within a radius of tens of meters, it was not worth it for the Scourge Army's zombies tactic. Heavy cannons of more than 150 mm were more suitable for bombing high-value targets such as fortresses, not these skeletons and zombies that Arthas saw as purely expendable. The first to fire was, of course, the Katyusha rocket launcher. Thousands of rockets flew across the sky, creating an artificial meteor shower. Boom! Flesh and blood flew everywhere, limbs exploded, and ice shards splashed everywhere. If it was an ordinary mortal army's infantry, facing such a terrifying attack, they would have collapsed or at least stopped advancing. However, the Scourge soldiers, who had no sense of pain and no consciousness, continued to limp forward. Even if their lower bodies were blown off, they still used their remaining arms to maintain their posture of crawling. In other places, perhaps Katyusha would have been enough to solve all the problems. This was the extremely cold Ice-Crown Glacier. Even though the surrounding mana veins had been invaded by Duque, violent cold winds still blew all year round. The Katyusha rockets landed on the ground. Other than the initial damage caused by the explosion, the fire that should have caused a second round of damage was extinguished by the cold wind. Even if there were any remnants of the fire, it would be extinguished by shadow wizards and low-level liches with their blizzard. On the Alliance's side, the Katyusha that had fired all the rockets quickly retreated, allowing the Katyusha that was fully loaded with rockets to replace it. Within the scope of the binoculars, the sea of undead, which was originally densely packed like a tidal wave, had become a little sparse. Fire the small-caliber cannons quickly. Target the enemy's large undead creatures. Immediately, more trapdoors on the mountain wall opened, and long cannons extended out, revealing dark muzzles. The cannoneers hiding behind the cannons were looking through the cannons. This was the mainstream support cannon of the Alliance, the 88 mm anti-aircraft cannon. These cannons could be used to attack ice dragons and abominations. It was versatile. They aimed at the gigantic undead monsters on the plateau and pulled the trigger of the cannons. Bang! Bang! Hundreds of holes on the mountain wall emitted black smoke from the cannons. Not only that, the 40 mm Bofors anti-air cannons that were specially installed at the front line also started to fire at the larger undead creatures. Everyone knew that the Calamity Army had ice dragons that were only left with bones. In actual combat, there were also many skeleton draconians and skeletal draconians. They were not as powerful as abominations, but if they charged into the infantry formation, they could still cause a lot of damage. It was a waste to use the 88 mm cannons to blast these things. The Bofors were just right. The thick and continuous cannons easily tore these big bones into pieces. Closer. It was getting closer. When they entered the range of the mortars, the entire Alliance's position was filled with the sound of cannons. If the soldiers did not put on earplugs in advance, they would probably all be deaf. At this time, they could only communicate with hand signals and lights. The Katyusha, 88 mm cannons, Bofors, and mortars worked together from far to near, from top to bottom, forming an extremely powerful firepower net. In an instant, the losses of the Calamity Army on the plateau increased rapidly. On average, for every calamity soldier that charged to the front of the Alliance's infantry position at the foot of the mountain, at least 5 calamity soldiers would be destroyed halfway. The next thing the undead army faced was the steel colossus at the front of the line of defense. These mechanical giants from Oder Mimmelin's workshop brandished their huge arms, and every time they swept across, they would scatter multiple undyings. Chapter 1694. There was not a single Alliance soldier in the first 3 trenches of the infantry position. The ones stationed there were the mechanical dwarfs and mechanical gnomes under Mimmelin's command. They were either using electric shocks or operating the new flamethrowers provided by the Alliance to destroy the Scourge soldiers with extreme efficiency. In Duque's estimation before coming to the Ice-Crown Glacier, this was already an almost invincible formation. Unfortunately, there were too many Scourge soldiers. The seemingly impregnable front line of defense would always be broken through within a few minutes. This was because the bottom of the plateau of the Ice-Crown Glacier was almost completely hollowed out by the spider demons belonging to the Scourge army. Those rushing over from the plateau were just bait. Soon, the real attack began. Near the first line of defense, hundreds of huge pits that could fit a tank suddenly appeared. Middle-level Scourge soldiers rushed out like marching ants. At the same time, dark clouds quickly flew over from the opposite side. They looked like dense locusts, but in fact, they were gargoyles that were even more exaggerated than a swarm of locusts. Any attack would not be less than 10,000. Tens of thousands? Hundreds of thousands? The Alliance soldiers seemed to have an illusion that the Scourge army had pulled out all the corpses and skeletons that had died in Azeroth over the past tens of thousands of years to become soldiers. It was no wonder. After all, in their eyes, it was as if all they could see were skeleton soldiers with tattered armor and no flesh. The zombie tide seemed to connect the sky and the earth. No matter how many times they faced such a sea of zombies, they still felt their scalps go numb every time they saw it. Boom! The heavy artillery at the rear of the Alliance's position began to roar. As the model of the Alliance's shotgun, once the Type 3 shell, hit, a small area of the air would suddenly be cleared. Bang! 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 When the most threatening group of gargoyles attacked, all the 40mm Bofors had no choice but to turn to the sky and fire. On the plateau to the east, the octuple bang cannons and Dongfeng anti-aircraft cannons that had long been prepared were the same. Countless gargoyles were hit by the cannons and were instantly torn into pieces, falling from the sky. However, this was meaningless. As long as the Lich King's magic power was not exhausted, there were as many gargoyles as he wanted. At first, the Alliance would still send griffins and hippogriffons to intercept them. There were too many casualties. The cruel exchange made every Alliance general's heart turn cold. The most disgusting thing was that if the griffins that died in the Ice-Crown Glacier were not treated with holy water in time, they would immediately turn into bone griffins and turn around to slaughter the Allied troops. The dragons of the Dragon Slumber Shrine could suppress the gargoyles, whose claws could hardly penetrate the scales and skin of the adult dragons. Dragons had the advantage of crushing their ranks. Unfortunately, there were too many gargoyles, and the giant dragons couldn't kill them all. Therefore, the Alliance's regular air force only lasted for 3 days before retreating. Replacing them were the Kiraj bug people that Duque had specially found on Kiraj. Although the twin emperors had temporarily knelt down, Duque's dominance over the Kiraji insect people had not fundamentally changed. Duque rarely used these insects, especially when Bao Bing played with the Sea of Insects. The biggest reason was that the Sea of Zergs didn't explode on a whim. The Insect Queen was ready-made. The price for the insect queen to ovulate and give birth to small insects was a large amount of meat. This meant that once Bao Bing went berserk, the entire area would be barren, all the animals would be killed, and all the corpses would be devoured. In the Eastern Kingdom mainland or Kalimdor, Duque didn't dare to play with the sea of insects. That was tantamount to suicide. In Northrend, Duque didn't have so many scruples. When surrounding the Scourge army in the Ice Crown Glacier, Duque directly let the two Courage insect queens build nests in the Howling Fjord and the Grizzly Hills. After strictly forbidding the insects from attacking people with the Alliance and Horde emblems, the insect people ate happily. At the cost of the remaining Vrykul people in the area and the extinction of all the wild animals in the Grizzly Hills, Duque finally got a flying insect army of a total of 1 million. In the sky, the gargoyles that passed through the dense curtain wall of anti-aircraft artillery and the interception of the giant dragon army began to dive towards the Alliance's position. However, they were intercepted by the Courage flying insects that were as dense as a swarm of locusts. Often, the two air forces in the sky intersected like lightning, and the winner was already decided. The broken limbs of the losers fell to the front of the position like dumplings falling into a pot. This kind of battle damage that was measured in hundreds every minute was a spectacular sight to behold. For the Alliance soldiers on the mountain wall defense line, this was a great pressure. Because as the last air defense line, the Courage insect people, was broken through, they had to face a double attack from the sky and from the ground. Sometimes, when they were firing, a gargoyle suddenly swooped down from the sky and cut off their head. This was already considered a kind of luck. The most tragic time was when a recruit was hooked by the sharp claws of a gargoyle and was directly taken into the air with a hoarse scream. A group of gargoyles swarmed up and directly tore off his limbs. This was not the end. The gargoyle was probably under the command of a lich and was spreading fear in the Alliance's camp. It grabbed the wailing man and swung him around in the sky. No anti-air cannons were able to hit him. Until an elven ranger shot the unlucky guy to death. Even so, the Scourge army still turned the poor guy into an immortal and then threw him back to the Alliance's position like a worm. But now, with the army of winged insects fighting the sea of gargoyles, the Alliance's infantrymen were much safer. They carried out their duties and repeated the actions of loading mortar shells and aiming mechanically. They used cannons, flamethrowers, grenades, and everything else they could think of to stop the tide of the undead army. In the sky more than 10 kilometers behind them, the battleships began to fire. The 400mm cannons brought about a destructive explosion. The largest area of the Scourge army on the plateau was wiped out. The violent explosion even collapsed the tunnel dug by the spider demons. It seemed that the Alliance had found the location of the frontline commander of the Scourge army and used heavy artillery to clear the area, directly destroying the Lich. The offensive of the Scourge army immediately stopped. The Lich King could indeed control any of the immortals in the Scourge army. But he couldn't divide his attention into 10 million parts and carry out precise control and command of every soldier. He could only make a general order, such as ordering 100,000 immortals to attack a certain area. As for which bunker and which cannon formation to attack, in fact, it still required the immortal commanders of different classes to carry out on-the-spot commands. Once they were eliminated, the Scourge army would be a bunch of blind flies and would be much easier to deal with. Seeing that the attack was ineffective, the Lich at the back stopped commanding and allowed the low-level immortals to be sent to their deaths. When the sound of the cannons gradually stopped, the earth elemental creatures under Alcavan started to take the field. They weren't cleaning up the battlefield, but the land around them. It was because of them that the Alliance could avoid being dug by the spider demons to the rear. Chapter 1695. The battle reports from the past few days made the leaders of the Alliance feel gratified and fortunate. The Scourge troop was never a dish that could be easily eaten. On the contrary, the Scourge army that withdrew most of the undead to the Ice-Crown Glacier was quite terrifying. An army of hundreds of thousands of survivors was already a huge pressure on the logistics department. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were under immense pressure. After all, almost all of their supplies came from the Eastern Kingdom. In terms of food, if it weren't for Rotterdam and Alterac that had become mass production areas again, Stormwind alone would definitely not be able to support such a terrifying amount of logistics. However, the Doomsday Army was simply cheating. The soldiers didn't need to eat, drink, defecate, or even sleep. Any ice cave or crack could be a hideout as long as there was a path for the undying soldiers to climb out. After killing the living, he cast a dark spell and immediately replenished the dead. Soldiers turned into soldiers, mages turned into liches, paladins turned into death knights. It was the same for puppets like the gargoyles. As long as they still had mana and a workshop, they would be able to kill 10,000 of them today and 10,000 more in a week. In the worst-case scenario, there would be more and more fights every minute. What about the Allied forces? A warrior, even a human with the shortest lifespan, would need at least 16 years to produce a soldier. Not to mention the elves, dwarves, and gnomes with lower fertility rates and longer lifespans. Even after the Second Battle of the Door of Darkness, the races had encouraged reproduction, but they still had to grow up. Once upon a time, the Alliance was very confused about Duque secretly taking in the Karaji insect people, and was even a little unhappy. After all, the Karaj insect people affected the appearance of the city, and their level of civilization was quite low. When the flying insects of the Karaji insect people replaced the griffins and hippogriffs as consumables in aerial battles, everyone had a completely different feeling. To some extent, the bugmen were the bane of the Scourge army. Their completely different physiological structure allowed the bugmen to basically ignore the plague of the Scourge army. At least, the plague that targeted the bugmen had yet to be developed. The bugmen were not picky with their food. As long as it was meat, it was fine. Duque tried to order the insects to eat the flesh of the abomination, but he found that the Karaji insect people were completely fine. He really didn't know what kind of modifications Thun had done to them in the past to make them almost immune to poison. Then there was aerial combat. Aerial battles had always been cruel. Often, life and death would be decided in an instant in the sky, whether it was prepared or unprepared. Either the gargoyle was chopped into pieces, or the flying insect was killed and fell to the ground. When the bugmen fell to the ground, they would often be smashed into pieces. Even if the Scourge army wanted to resurrect, they would only be able to resurrect a pile of trash with no combat power. In the past, he didn't know that the Karaji insect people's hard but not flexible limbs would have miraculous effects. From the looks of it now, the bugmen were a bit like suicide bombers. If they could not kill the enemy, they would destroy them cleanly, leaving no way out for the enemy. For a long time to come, Duque still needed the bugmen to wear down the gargoyles. In the past, the Alliance had used their powerful air force to destroy the insect swarm, but it had been very difficult to destroy the gargoyle army. At the end of the day, the gargoyle's defense was higher, and a 40mm Bofors cannon couldn't kill it. However, once the Karaj bug men with low defense hit their bodies, they were basically dead. However, in aerial combat, 2 bugmen would be able to kill 1 gargoyle at the risk of their lives. The bugmen didn't even need money, and even if they all died, their morale wouldn't be affected. Even the bug race themselves didn't care. Phew. The bugmen are really useful, but it's a bit harmful to the environment. Duque smiled bitterly. However, it wasn't the Alliance's territory, so who would care? Perhaps in the future, the Alliance and the Horde would be stationed here, but at least not now. The tragic war of attrition lasted from March to May. Regardless of whether Arthas admitted it or not, the Scourge army was still declining. Originally, there were millions of Undying attacking every day, but it became 1 attack every few days. Meanwhile, the Alliance fought steadily, advancing the trenches and artillery positions step by step. Everywhere they went, they would ask Alcavan to help solidify the ground. Even the spider demons couldn't sneak attack through the ground. No, in fact, there was one time when Arthas did gather a large number of spider demons and prepared to forcefully dig a huge tunnel to the rear of the Alliance to destroy the Alliance's supplies there. Unfortunately, this group of miserable spider demons encountered the Oros children that Duque had specially transferred from Silithus. These spider demons were nothing in front of the bigger bugs, who were even more formidable. This kind of stable battle strategy left Arthas at his wits' end. On the 3rd of May, Arthas' control was only left in the southwestern part of the Ice Crown Glacier. There were only 3 important places left in the periphery: the Dark Cathedral, the Door of Fear, Kaelisa, and the evil castle of Maricaris. On the Ice Throne, Arthas looked down at the 2 powerful existences, one big and one small, who were emitting demigod energy waves. Finally, his cold voice came from under the black helmet. "Do you have any opinions about the recent situation of the Scourge army? Let me fight with Duke Marcus again. As long as I can snatch back my Titan runes." Maligos said through gritted teeth. "My opinion is the opposite. I think that we should retreat. There's no point in defending the periphery, and we'll lose the elite liches and death knights of the army. Since the Alliance is going to attack the Ice Crown Fortress no matter what, we might as well destroy the enemy's main force in the fortress," the Sun King said. In the past, given Arthas's pride, he would definitely not agree. This was because it would mean that he was backing down and admitting that he, who had many soldiers and generals, would lose the overall situation. However, he did not object on the spot. Arthas said coldly, "Convince me." At this moment, the palm print on the right side of Anastrian's face, which was emitting dark energy, trembled because of the movement of his cheekbones. "It's already very difficult for us to exhaust the Alliance. Our troops lack the ability to break through, and we can't kill many of them. Not to mention replenishing our forces. Moreover, even if we kill Duke Marcus outside the Ice Crown Fortress, he has a high chance of resurrection. However, in the Ice Crown Fortress, even if he's a demigod, if he dies in front of the Ice Throne, his soul won't be able to return to planet Azeroth." When the Sun King said this, Arthas's eyes lit up. At this point in the war, there was no such thing as mercy. If the Alliance couldn't take down the Ice Crown Fortress and eliminate Arthas, once they retreated, it wouldn't take more than a few years for the Scourge army to create an army of over 100 million immortals. There was no way the hundreds of thousands of people in the Allied army could stay in this barren land forever. Furthermore, apart from Duke and the Dragon aspect, who else in the Allied army would dare to guarantee that they would be able to defend against Arthas's assault? Chapter 1696. Was face more important or substance more important? If it was possible, of course it would be face, but also practical benefits. Be it in history or in this life, Arthas was a pragmatist deep down. In the Stratholme incident in history, Arthas could hypocritically wait for the citizens to become undead before crying in the name of righteousness and purify the citizens of Stratholme. For the sake of the higher goal in his heart, he did not hesitate to tarnish his reputation when he was still the Prince of Lordaeron at that time. He ordered the massacre and dirtied his hands. Arthas finally had to face reality when he couldn't do anything about it. Withdraw the elites. With a mental command from the Lich King, the defense of the Calamity army at the remaining important fulcrums of the fortresses showed obvious signs of weakening. William, Magni, and Sylvanus, who were commanding at the front, and Kael, that's and Jaina, who were supporting and shooting from the rear, all felt the changes in the Calamity army immediately. Although the attack of the Allied forces was covered by the 2 floating cities of Dalajan and Naxxramas, which had been temporarily repaired, and avoided the pain of attacking from the rear, the endless number of Calamity army soldiers still brought great trouble to the advancement of the battlefront. It was different now. In the past, there would definitely be a Death Knight or a Lich in every key node or fortress to hold the fort. However, the attacks in the past few days were abnormally smooth, and they couldn't find any mid-level undead, let alone high-level undead. The undead that stayed behind would either rush out like a swarm of bees to be eaten, or stick to their own positions and only attack the enemies that entered their territory. As for their companions that were besieged and beaten next door, they would sit and watch as they were killed, and then wait for the fate of destruction to befall them. Is it finally time for the final battle? Duque gently tapped the command table with his right index finger, and then gave an order. Pass down the order. Let the Silver Hand and all the powerhouses above the radiant moon level rest for 3 days. The front line will be commanded by the Deputy General. Duque's order was quickly carried out, but it also attracted a rather unexpected visitor. Oh. Varrock, why are you here? Naturally, it was Varrock Salyafar. This orc who was loyal to the great chieftain seemed to have aged a lot. Not only did he show signs of a hunchback, but his hair and sideburns were also much whiter than a few days ago. His only son was dead. Even if his hair didn't turn white overnight, it was more or less the same. Duque sighed. In a way, he was watching Salyafar die. If Putre was the mastermind and Arthes the culprit, then Duque would at least have an accomplice. Unfortunately, his race and position were different, so it was impossible for him to consider things from the perspective of the tribe. In a sense, young Salyafar was dead, and the tribe had lost the chance to produce a second Salyafar. Although the chances weren't high to begin with. But Duque respected Varrock. He was brave and loyal. In the original history, he was a brave warrior who survived from the first dark portal to the era when the army arrived again. Your Excellency Duke Marcus, I hope that I can at least join the Alliance's hero group as an individual. Duque looked at the weathered face and the pair of bloodshot, half-protruding eyes and sighed again. Duque could completely understand the tribe's actions. The tribe had sacrificed enough. An army of more than 200,000 had been destroyed in one day. 2 leader-level powerhouses had been lost at once. One was the strongest mage, and the other was a rising star who could have become the next great chieftain. It would be a miracle if Thrall didn't have any resentment. The tribe was now lacking in talents. If another leader of a large race died, such as Cain or Wajin, then the situation of the tribe would definitely fall apart. In fact, Thrall was absolutely against King Salyafar coming to attack Icecrown Fortress. On the surface, Thrall couldn't find a reason. Varrock continued, Dranos is my only son. He is a good child, with the bravery and fearlessness of orcs, and a sense of the big picture that orcs often don't have. I once pinned all my hopes and future on him. Unfortunately, since fate has determined that the Salyafar family will be cut off, I have to accept this fate. All of a sudden, Varrock's muscles tensed up, but in the end, not as a commander, not as a beast man, but as a father. Even if I can't save him, I must at least let him rest in peace. Father? This word deeply touched Duque's heart. He suddenly thought of the child in Aurelia and Sasha's womb. Yes. He had been a father for a long time. From the moment they were conceived. If he were in Varrock's shoes, he would probably go crazy too. Alright, Varrock, I agree. This is the resonance of being a father. You agree? Varrock still seemed to be in disbelief. This was because the sudden addition of an outsider could have a huge impact on the teamwork of the team. As the commander of the orcs, of course he knew how dangerous it was to have a subordinate who could possibly go berserk in an elite team with extremely low tolerance for mistakes. Thank you, Duke Marcus. Varrock did not know what else to say. His expression was a little stiff, and in the end, he only scratched his head. Duque thought for a moment and chose to comfort Varrock, even though it made him feel like he was being hypocritical. Varrock. Death is not the end. Even the Alliance can tolerate Darian Mograine and his Ebon Blade Knights. If we can successfully defeat Arthas, I'm sure many Undying will be able to break free and join the fight against the Burning Legion. This. Oh, that too. Varrock suddenly thought that his son might have a chance to return to him, even as an undying. His son was still his son, and the soul in that shell was still the soul that had accompanied him for more than 20 years. Varrock's mood suddenly improved. Yes. Hope had not completely disappeared. After thanking him profusely, Varrock retreated. But at this moment, Duque thought of a rather serious matter that could not be ignored. The original history had long been messed up by him, this ruthless butterfly. If there was a goddess of destiny, he would definitely be the bastard who raped her countless times. But here came the problem. In order to prevent the undead from rioting, Bolvar for Dragon, who was burned by the flames and tortured by the idiot, succeeded as the Lich King and became the third-generation leader of the Lich Kingdom after Arthas died. Now that Bolvar was alive and well, then. If there really was a Lich King, where would Duke find the noble and awesome soul to sit in the Lich King's position? Chapter 1697. Bolvar, who became the Lich King in history, was a Lich King who had no sense of existence. In a sense, he was not as famous as the Four Horsemen of the New Apocalypse, who later belonged to him. In any case, there was the former king of Torrential Fortress, Sora's Trollbane, and the white-legged Sally Whitemane of the Blood Dog couple. So, when Duque thought of this problem, he was still a little annoyed. I can't kill for Dragon just because there's a Lich King, can I? Duque laughed bitterly in his heart. One could not become a Lich King just because they wanted to. First, they had to have extraordinary willpower. Without willpower, there was no spiritual power, and there was no way to cross the void and control the immortals from thousands of miles away. Without willpower, even if they were placed on the throne of the Lich King, they would not be able to do anything. In his previous life, Bolvar was betrayed in the Gate of Wrath, and then burned by Alexstrasza, who temporarily became the Minister of Foreign Affairs. His whole body was bathed in flames, and the plague virus in his body was burned to ashes, pulling him back from the brink of death. Of course, no one could withstand such a high temperature of the red dragon's flames. Bolvar's body was tormented by the flames, but he was already half alive and half dead. Later, the Lich King found him in the Gate of Wrath and brought him back to Icecrown Fortress, trying to turn him into a Death Knight to serve him. But Bolvar's strong willpower prevented him from obeying the Lich King. Bolvar had experienced the cruelest willpower training to become the third Lich King. Sigh. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Duque gave up on worrying about the future. Duque suddenly laughed bitterly. Arthas's car had not been overturned yet, and he was already thinking about the problem of his successor. Wasn't that a little too ambitious? Arthas retreating his troops back to Icecrown Fortress was not equivalent to a beautiful woman lying naked and begging for a frontal assault. On the contrary, it made the Scourge army into a tortoise's shell. Anyone who dared to underestimate this kind of strategic retreat would hit their head and bleed. Duque was still playing it safe. First, he had Gavin Rad and Theon lead the Silver Hand into the field and occupy the Dark Cathedral and the Evil Castle in the middle of Icecrown Glacier. Once he gained control of these two key mana vein nodes, he would be able to destroy the magic array that Arthas had set up in the Icecrown Glacier. Duque didn't even let Naxxramas or the Dalajan sit directly on either side. Instead, he asked Neru to purify it before personally setting up a magic array. Should I say, as expected of the filthy demon queen? Duque really did find something fishy about these two earth veins. It was a very secretive magic spell. If someone or a powerful magic system extracted mana from it, it would be fine normally, but once it entered 100% status, the spell hidden in the mana vein would be triggered and inject the will of the Lich King into the magic system. Tisk, have we been discovered? Dragon Lich Maligos spat. Anastrian, who had an ice skull on his head, laughed. How could that little trick fool Duke Marcus? Humph. After occupying 5 of the 6 mana veins in the Icecrown Glacier, Duque could finally announce that he had obtained overwhelming control of the magic net in this area. From this moment onwards, Icecrown Fortress would no longer receive an abundant supply of mana. As long as they were willing to work hard to weaken it, they would definitely be able to make the Icecrown Fortress lose its mana. Throughout the second half of March, the Allied army had been setting up cannons. From the Dark Cathedral to the Door of Fear, Kaelisa, and then to the Evil Castle in the middle of the region, the Alliance had set up more than 5,000 heavy cannons with a caliber of 150 mm and above on this purified land. 3 new Gustav cannons, which were the most representative of the cannon doctrine, were placed behind the back slope of the Evil Castle of Malakaris, which had the highest terrain. Length, 42. 97 meters width, 7 meters height, 11. 6 meters weight, 1,350 tons caliber, 800 mm length, 32. 48 meters weight, 400 tons shooting angle, plus 53 degrees shell weight, 71 tons, armor-piercing shell, 48 tons, high explosive shell. In an era without missiles, such heavy cannons could be said to be a true killing machine. In order to avoid a repeat of the incident where Arthas had blown up Naxxramas with one big move, the sneaky Duque had ordered all of the 200 mm and above cannons to be moved to the back slope, not giving the two fools a chance to attack directly. After all, the trajectory of the cannons was a parabola. Azeroth was a planet, and the ground had a natural arc. It was basically impossible to see anything beyond 4 kilometers on flat ground. However, the new cannons, which used TNT as gunpowder, had a range of more than 10 kilometers. And, Frostmourn's Fury, could only be used for direct attacks. Unless Arthas broke out of the encirclement by 20 kilometers just to dismantle the cannons, the 3 Gustav cannons were absolutely safe. When Duque told this to Magni, this unkind damn dwarf laughed for a long time. Ha ha ha. I was worried that my baby would be hurt. Now it's all right. Bulang leaned close to Duque and whispered, "Big brother is a classic example of forgetting his old love when he has a new lover." Previously, he kept muttering that the caliber of the new ship cannons was not as good as the small steel cannons from back then. Later, after the Alliance gave him money to build these giant cannons that can shoot tens of kilometers, his resentment subsided a little. Duque smiled bitterly. The small steel cannons that had once ended the Second Battle of the Dark Portal were, in the end, mortars. They could not shoot far at all. In a tactical sense, how could they compare with this kind of killing machine that could shoot tens of kilometers? In the future, we will build bigger cannons. Magni shouted loudly. Duque smiled but did not say anything. In the future, that was the era of missiles and laser weapons. However, in order to test Arthas's reaction, as far as the eye could see from Icecrown Fortress, there were old cannons that could be pulled into a museum. They still had power, but it was just a pretense. Even the gunners were the mechanical gnomes under Mimiron. It's a pity that there are no more mechanical gnomes. Duque was speaking the truth. In the limit left by Titan, there could only be 1,000 mechanical gnomes at most, and 2,000 mechanical dwarfs. This was the absolute authority given to Mimiron. Otherwise, if there was an unlimited number of them, just Mimiron's robot army alone would be enough to drown the entire Calamity army. Mimiron, who was standing at the side, had electronic light flickering in his eyes. He suddenly said, "Duke Marcus, if I can obtain Titan's authorization, the limit of my control will be 10 times the current upper limit." After saying that, Mimiron fell silent again. To be honest, Duque still did not know how to interact with Mimiron. There were many times when Duque could not find any common points with him. It was like chatting with a robot. He could not start a conversation. On the other hand, Mimiron was also quite supportive of the Alliance's battle. "Sigh, can we only slowly interact after the war?" Chapter 1698. There had never been a large-scale battle that ended in a single battle. The more he led a large-scale battle, the more Duque felt moved by this saying. If he wanted to end the war quickly, he might end up like the gates of heaven's wrath in history, smashing his head against a fool who had the advantage of geography and manpower. Arthas herself was powerful enough. She also controlled the mana veins of the entire Ice-Crown Glacier. Second-rate fighters like Bolvar and young Salyafar would be annihilated if they ran into her. After spending so much time to seize the geographical advantage and reduce the total number of soldiers of the Calamity army to an acceptable range, Duque finally began his attack on the Ice-Crown fortress. Even so, Duque still divided the allied army into echelons and sent them up one by one. The sky above the Ice-Crown fortress was always dark and gloomy, and the wind howled angrily. Ever since the explosion of the ancient Kalimdor continent, this gloomy chill had persisted for tens of thousands of years. The wind cut like a knife. Even though it was already summer, the temperature in the Ice-Crown fortress was not higher than -20 degrees. The soldiers of the Allied army put on thick cotton-padded jackets and gloves, wrapping themselves up like dumplings. Even their faces were covered with thick goggles and half-masks. Only the hot air coming out of their mouths and noses showed that they were alive. Whoosh. Whoosh, 1, 2. 5 dazzling blue pillars of light rose from different directions of the Ice-Crown Glacier. Those were the magic formations on the 5 mana veins of the City of Calamity, the Castle of Evil, and the Cathedral of Darkness. Each formation was overseen by a top-notch radiant moon mage, such as the great astromancer Solarian. They chanted complicated incantations and used hand gestures that mortals would never understand to slowly fine-tune the energy output of the mana veins. Admittedly, all the formations had been personally drawn by Duque using the Titan runestones. The specific effects still depended on the spellcaster. Raising his head, the Lich King's gaze pierced through space and landed on the magic pillars of light. He quietly watched as the pillars of light grew brighter and brighter, connecting the heavens and the earth, as if they could reach the other side of the universe. Your Majesty, don't worry. The magic power of the 5 branches combined is not as great as that of the Ice-Crown fortress, the Sun King comforted Arthas. Anastrian was telling the truth. The Ice-Crown citadel had not been built randomly. It had been specially chosen by Zul when he descended upon Azeroth. That first-generation Lich King spread his mind power throughout Noscent and searched for a long time before picking this place. Then, while strengthening his own forces, he dispatched various undead as craftsmen to build this unique ice castle. Although the 5 mana veins in the surroundings were very powerful, they were only about 70% of the Ice-Crown fortress strength. However, when the 2 floating cities, Naxxramas and the Dalajan, appeared in mid-air in the distance to the southwest and southeast of the Ice-Crown fortress, Arthas suddenly had an ominous premonition. No! I'm going to destroy a floating city first. Arthas said as he stood up. Just as he was about to make a move, there was a sudden rumble in the sky. It was a line of fire falling from the distant sky. A huge comet fell diagonally, breaking through the dark void, smashing through the thick clouds, burning the cold winds in the atmosphere into blazing turbulence, and finally aimed at the Ice-Crown citadel. Arthas was no stranger to this scene. AI. Lu. N. This name was almost squeezed out from under the heavy black helmet. It was the moon goddess Elun. Azeroth was the only true god, and this was after excluding Si Thun and the other evil gods. Although Elun had never truly descended upon this land for unknown reasons, this did not prevent her from participating in this war in her own way. On a high platform facing the northeast of Naxxramas, Tyrande stood against the wind, her green hair and snow-white priest robes fluttering in the wind. The mysterious moonlight transcended the barrier of day and night and descended upon her, communicating with her and communicating with her. The goddess used her sharp eyes to lock onto her target. Her physical and mental strength were pouring out like a broken dam, and for a moment, even Tyrant felt like she could not hold on any longer. Soon, a smile appeared on that holy and heroic face. The final adjustment had been completed, and the rest was up to gravity. Perhaps Arthas could try using a light cannon to see if it could stop the meteorite from falling, deflect it, or something else. Elun would naturally protect this falling meteorite with her divine power. No matter what Arthas did, Elun's goal of consuming the magic power of the ice-crowned citadel would be achieved. Behind the Lich King's helmet, there was a clear anger in the pair of deep eyes. Humph. Send it to me if you have the guts. When passing through the atmosphere, the strong friction would cause the meteorite to burn and reduce its weight. Even so, when it fell to the ground, there would be at least 1,000 tons of meteorite. Coupled with the terrifying kinetic energy, even the sturdy ice-crowned citadel would not be able to withstand a meteorite head-on. This was an open plot. An open plot that Arthas could not resist. A beam of white light that seemed to freeze everything in the entire field of vision was shot out from the ice-crowned citadel. Arthas finally made his move. Frostmourn's Wrath. The white freezing beam collided with Elun's purple and blue meteorite in midair. It burst into a dazzling brilliance like fireworks. Ah, so beautiful. Jaina, who was guarding Naxxramas, felt as if she had returned to her childhood, when she first saw fireworks. Next to her, Duque smirked. Wow! The Lich King is angry again. Damn it, let's see how many times you can be angry. Duque happily snapped his fingers, and Khadgar, who was next to him, immediately understood. 5 minutes later, on the two floating cities of Dalajan and Naxxramas, huge pillars of light also lit up into the sky. On the frozen throne, Arthas suddenly lost his voice. What? If he was not wearing the full-face helmet that covered all his expressions, his face would probably be very ugly right now. 5 earth veins, plus the 2 floating cities, a total of 7 fulcrums formed a strange magic array. 7 beams of light pierced the sky, and as they were about to penetrate the atmosphere, countless glowing Titan runes began to spread. They emitted a mysterious radiance, and in a way that Arthas could not understand, they finally formed a huge circular magic array. The earth trembled slightly, and the entire continent of Northrend was dyed purple and blue. It was as if the sun had risen at the end of the night, forcefully and domineeringly erasing the stars and the moon from the sky. There was only one color left in the world. Chapter 1699. Countless soldiers of the Allied army witnessed this scene. Everyone's mouth was unconsciously half open as they sighed in astonishment. This was a grand scene that only existed in epics. Even though Duke's generosity had refreshed their knowledge time and time again, but every time, they would still be fiercely shocked. Duque. On the frozen throne, Arthas let out a voice filled with incomparable resentment. At this moment, how could he not know what Duque was planning? The combined energy of the 5 mana veins was indeed unable to reduce the overwhelming mana of the Ice Crown Fortress, but with the addition of the 2 floating cities, it was a different story. As the 2 most important mana nodes of the magic net, the Dalajan and Naxxramas were not only the mana hubs under Duque's control, but also the largest mana storage, and an important connection between the 4 major elemental realms. Arthas could never have imagined that Duque could actually connect these 2 unrelated mana nodes with the mana veins to form a huge magic array, which in turn surpassed the transcendent status of the Ice Crown Fortress. In the sky, the huge Titan runic magic array emitted a dazzling brilliance. Finally, all the mana condensed into a pillar of light that would take about 10 people to wrap their arms around, and fiercely fell from the sky, pressing down on the Ice Crown Fortress. The moment before the pillar of light hit the Ice Crown Fortress, Arthas refused to let his efforts go to waste, because this fortress at the top of the snowy mountain was the symbol of his control over this land of ice and snow, and even the future of the entire land. On the dark black castle, there was an uncomfortable pale light, and an even thicker white pillar of light rose against the sky, colliding with the purple and blue pillar of light falling from the sky. At first, the white light strongly counterattacked, once raising the position of the collision to 2 kilometers above the castle. But as the magic array continued to descend more abundant and purer mana, the white light was once again suppressed. Finally, 2 terrifying pillars of light, one purple and one white, condensed about 500 meters above the fortress, forming a state of mutual exhaustion. Squeak! It was hard to describe this sound with words, but it could only be said that it was more like the sound of electricity. In the command room of Naxxramas, Duque was expressionless. He had already handed over the maintenance of the magic array to a few of his subordinates. He believed that Khadgar, Jaina, and Kale, these veteran powerhouses, would not disappoint him. Duque raised his right arm up high and brought it down heavily with a knife-hand posture. Fire! In the command room, in close to 100 large and small images, each cannon let out its own unique roar. The continuous explosions of the cannons condensed into a ball in the air. It sounded like the entire frozen mountain range had suddenly collapsed. The terrifying feeling of the entire mountain shaking left all the Alliance soldiers dumbfounded. Even though they were wearing earplugs, the rumbling sounds that they associated with the scene still made every gunner feel like they were temporarily deafened. That ear-piercing buzzing sound made his brain feel like it was splitting apart. In front of the ice throne, the dragon Lich Malygos glanced at his master and snorted coldly. Roar! On the outer wall of the ice-crowned fortress, every relief, every terrifying sculpture, came to life. They turned into gargoyles powered by dark magic, or obsidian statue guardians. They flapped their heavy wings, and under the drive of magic, they rode the wind elements beneath them and quickly flew into the air. With their stone bodies that had nothing to do with life, they welcomed the torrential rain of cannonballs. Rumble! A series of explosions, one after another, formed a huge chain of explosions, connecting from the leftmost end of the Alliance soldiers' field of vision to the rightmost end. If they didn't turn their necks, no one could see the entire scene. Keep shooting. Don't stop. Keep shooting. Don't be afraid even if your chamber explodes. Bulang Bronzebeard ordered fiercely. Malygos quickly discovered that this kind of meat shield tactic could not last long. The gargoyles could still take the cannonballs with a caliber of less than 200 mm and perish together with them. The cannonballs above 200 mm tended to have a faster initial velocity, and with too many cannonballs, it became more and more chaotic to deal with. Moreover, the Alliance's cannonballs were pouring down like they were free, and the number of gargoyles that could be mobilized was decreasing. Bang, bang, bang. More and more cannonballs began to explode on the magic shield of the ice-crowned fortress. The so-called magic shield was never an absolute defense. It was nothing more than using energy to offset the external impact and energy. When there was too much external energy, or the impact per unit area was too strong, the shield would break. Everyone could see that if this continued, the ice-crowned fortress would not last long and would be hit directly by the cannonballs. Your Majesty, please make a decision. Anastrian lowered his ice skull and bowed deeply. No. I'm not willing. Arthas's ferocious roar contained too much unwillingness. Your Majesty, please make a decision. Anastrian emphasized again. Fine. I'll listen to you this time. I'll definitely make Duke Marcus and his damn alliance pay the price of destruction. I'll make them all crawl in front of me like dogs. Arthas was practically roaring these words. Outside, Bulang was absolutely confident that if Arthas did not do anything, the entire ice-crowned fortress would be drowned by modern cannons. The Gustav, with an 800 mm caliber, could definitely cut this ugly fortress into half. Seeing that the magic shield of the ice-crowned fortress was showing signs of collapsing, the huge fortress suddenly fell into a trance. As if separated by a layer of hazy mist, the entire fortress looked illusory. Boom, boom, boom. The cannons that had never stopped continued to pour cannonballs. Something strange happened. The moment the huge cannonballs touched the mist, they suddenly slowed down. The cannonballs that could only be seen with the naked eye all slowed down as if they had fallen into an extremely viscous paste. Their speed became slower and slower. Finally, in front of an unknown mysterious force, they were crushed and exploded. Even if they exploded, the range of the explosion was very small. At most, the flames and shrapnel of the explosion could only reach a meter away. Then, the entire cannonball disappeared without a trace. What? What the hell is this? In the sky, there was no longer white light fighting against the purple and blue cannonballs of the giant Titan rune magic formation. When the terrifying energy of the Titan, which should theoretically be able to destroy heaven and earth, crashed down, it merely caused the entire fortress to fluctuate in confusion. It was like a ripple caused by a small stone thrown into a calm lake. That was all. Chapter 1700. In the command center of the Naxxramas alliance, every leader, including Duque, stood up. They could not hide the shock on their faces. What the hell was this? Cannonballs could not penetrate, and even the Titan's energy could not affect it? Why don't you just fly in the sky? Suddenly, the door to the command center opened. Tyrande was still in the position of pushing the door open. Duque could see that there was something wrong with Tyrande's eyes. Her pupils had also turned white. It was not the white of the scara, but a strange kind of white that could be distinguished from the scara of her eyes. That psychedelic glow made Duque think of a possibility. Duke Marcus, Arthas is going all out. That is, the Lich King's domain. As soon as this Tyrande spoke, Duque knew who she was. Elun? Yes, the situation is a bit urgent. I attached a little of my will to my high priest. Sorry, Elun said. Duque narrowed his eyes. He realized that there was something that Elun did not want to talk about through divine descent like before. He asked tentatively, domain? Of course, Duque knew what a domain was. He was just not sure if the domain he knew was the same as the one in front of him. Look at the sky, Tyrande, who was possessed by Elun, said loudly. Everyone looked at the open skylight. There was still a dark cloud above their heads. Nothing. Wait. This evil aura was getting thicker and thicker. Elun smiled bitterly. Finally found out? I just found out. It seems that we have all underestimated Arthas. In fact, he is opening the largest canopy of the undead in history. From the day you set foot on this continent to prepare for the punitive expedition against him, he has been carrying out this step. Wait, if it is the canopy of the undead. Duque was confused. He is hiding very well, pretending to be defeated. In fact, while you are consuming the Scourge's troops, you are also helping him spread the aura of the undead into the sky. Once this huge canopy of the undead is completed, all the creatures shrouded under the canopy will be forced to gradually transform into undead. All the dead skeletons and wandering souls would be completely transformed into higher-level undying beings. Just now, Arthas finally launched the sky screen. Duque didn't say anything. He noticed that Elun had used the word ruthless. Look. Elun pointed with her finger. Countless undyings appeared in many of the videos. They emerged from the crevices of the cliffs, from beneath the snow, from the tiles of the ice-crowned fortress, and from the cracks in the decorations of the fortress walls. Originally, the undyings would have appeared as ambushers and caught the attackers off guard. Apparently, they didn't know what had happened. They actually ran out of control. This is, Elun said with certainty, I was right. Activating such a wide canopy of undead far exceeds the upper limit of the Lich King's control, so the price is that Arthas has to give up 99% of his undead subordinates. It was no exaggeration to say that the Doomsday Army was in a state of collapse and chaos. Since he had paid such a heavy price, Arthas' only choice was to try his best to recoup his losses. Magni clenched his teeth. Good. Arthas is ruthless. At this moment, Arthas' soul voice resounded in the sky. He. Have you finally found out? Unfortunately, it's too late. The great kingdom of the undead is already under construction. You will all become my people. My slaves. Don't even think about it. Sylvanas scolded. Ha. It's too late. Perhaps you demigods are immune to my death curse, but as long as you are immortal, you will not be able to escape from my palm. Even if you leave Northrend now, the death curse will still accompany you and accelerate the countdown of your life. When you return to your warm homes in Lordaeron to reunite with your families, you will become the most ferocious undead, bringing your family, your friends, and your loved ones into the kingdom of the undead. Ha. Arthas' huge illusory head laughed maniacally in the sky above the Icecrown fortress. He took off his helmet that symbolized terror and revealed his original appearance. Arthas, who used to be so handsome, now had a head of white hair that looked like a dead man's. His face was firm and well-defined, and now every curve of his face was full of evil and madness. His cheeks trembled, and the stubble on his chin looked like the hand of a devil. No. It's not too late. Tyrande, who was possessed by Elun, pointed at the Icecrown fortress. As long as I defeat you before this canopy of undead is completed, everything will end. Hearing Elun's shout, Arthas stopped his maniacal laughter. He suddenly said, yes. Come in. Come into my stage of righteousness and evil. Only the performers who stood on this stage could truly hurt the other party. Come, Duke Marcus. Come. Fools who think of themselves as righteous, let us fight it out in the Icecrown fortress. With that, Arthas' huge illusory head disappeared. Jaina pondered for a moment. I think I understand what that damned realm of his is. Only those who are righteous or evil can enter. Those who are not on the stage cannot interfere with those on the stage. That's about it. Damn it, the Alliance's greatest advantage in long-range attacks has been nullified. Everyone was a little annoyed. They had originally wanted to fire their cannons and bombard the Alliance. But now, it didn't seem like it would work. Ho. Ha. Ha. Duque chuckled at first, then turned into laughter. Elun, you possessed Tyrande because you have started to suppress the expansion of the canopy of undead in the air, right? Yes, that's right. I'll leave the sky to you. Elun reminded, all right. However, the magic formation formed by the 7 nodes must be preserved. Otherwise, Arthas can switch back at any time and replenish his mana through the magical veins under the Icecrown fortress. Then, Jaina and Kale, that's, the 7 of you stay here. Understood. Understood. Duke turned his head, his fierce gaze sweeping across every leader's face. Everyone, what the allied army is going to do has never changed from the beginning. Since Arthas desires destruction, we will grant him destruction. Alliance heroes. Attack. Oh, in the command center, every Alliance leader raised their fists high. Thousands of Alliance professionals formed an assault team around the Icecrown fortress. They rushed in from all directions and launched a fierce attack on the wandering undead. At the same time, Duque led the experts of the Alliance to the Avenue of Death in front of the Icecrown fortress. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.